All right. I believe we are all set. Thank you. We had some minor technical difficulties here in council chambers, but we're ready to kick it off. Good evening and welcome to the March 24th, 2025 meeting of the Menlo Park Planning Commission. I am Chair Jennifer Schindler, and I thank you for joining us this evening, either remotely or here in council chambers. Established by state law, our city's planning commission is composed of 7 volunteer residents of Menlo Park, appointed to 4-year terms by the city council. Our planning commission is not a policy setting body, that's the city council. We are a policy implementing body. We review development proposals for compliance with our city's general plan and zoning ordinances, which can both be found on the city's website. The Commission also reviews city-initiated land use planning projects, such as general plan updates and zoning ordinance amendments. The Commission reviews development proposals requiring a use permit, architectural control, a variance, minor subdivision, as well as the environmental reviews associated with those projects. When applicable, the Planning Commission reviews below market rate, or BMR, housing agreements associated with these applications. The Commission is the final decision-making body for these applications, unless appealed to the City Council. The Commission also serves as a recommending body to the City Council for major subdivisions, rezoning, conditional development permits, zoning ordinance amendments, general plan amendments, and environmental reviews associated with those projects. If applicable, the Planning Commission reviews and makes recommendations on BMR agreements associated with these projects. We work closely with the staff in our city's planning division, which is responsible for implementation of the general plan, zoning ordinances, and related policies. We encourage your active participation, whether you are an applicant or interested member of the public, and there will be an opportunity to speak publicly for each specific agenda item, as well as for general public comment. So with that, I will call roll for our commissioners. Commissioner Peruzzi.
Present.
Commissioner Doe.
Present.
Vice Chair Eric.
Present.
Commissioner Farrick.
Here.
Commissioner Sillen.
Here.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Present.
And I am Chair Schindler. I am present. We have 7 commissioners here in chambers, which is a quorum. We will now move on to the next section of our agenda, reports and announcements. Ms. Sandmeyer, are there any staff reports or announcements this evening?
Yes, good evening, Chair Schindler and Commissioners. So last Saturday, March 22nd, City Council held its goal setting for this fiscal year. City staff will provide a summary of that, and that summary will likely be agendized at a future City Council meeting. Tomorrow night, the General Plan Annual Progress Report will go to the City Council, and that's also on the agenda for tonight's Planning Commission meeting. And finally, 3705 Haven, a multifamily project that went to Planning Commission on February 24th, has been called up to the council, and that will likely be on the April 29th agenda. And that concludes my reports and announcements, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do commissioners have any questions or follow-up points for Ms. Sandmeyer's announcement? Commissioner Sillen.
Sorry if I missed it. For the project that was called up to council, was that an appeal or did a council member pull it? Can you share that?
Yes, it was called up by a council member.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, and do commissioners have any of their own reports or announcements? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and move us to the next section of our agenda, which is public comment, item D. Under public comment, the public may address the commission on any subject not listed on the agenda. Each speaker may address the commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. You're not required to provide your name or city of residence, but it is helpful. The commission cannot act on items not listed on the agenda, and therefore the commission cannot respond to non-agenda issues brought up under public comment other than to provide general information. Please know that if you are here tonight to comment on one of our agenda items, you will have a chance to speak when we get to that item on the agenda. So now to learn how to participate, I'm going to turn it over to our clerk this evening, Mr. Pruder. Mr. Pruder, could you please explain how the public may participate and then begin our general public comment period?
Thank you, and good evening, Chair Schindler, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. For public comment periods such as this one, members of the public in person can fill out a public comment card, which is located at the back of the council chambers, and provide it to me, the clerk, and we'll have you speak in person. And for those who are joining us today via Zoom or by phone on Zoom, the Zoom members can press the hand icon to raise your hand, and we will allow you to speak at the given time. And then if anyone is calling by phone, they can press *9 on their keypad, and that will also indicate that you would like to speak. And with that, I'm looking now and I don't see any hands raised. We could wait a moment longer if you'd like. Thank you.
Let's give it just a few more seconds. Do we have any hands raised at this point?
I see no hands raised, and I also have not received any comment cards. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pruder. I will now go ahead and close general public comment portion of our agenda and note that there is, and move on. Typically, the next section of our agenda is a consent calendar. There are no consent calendar items this evening, so I will move us ahead to the public hearing section of our agenda. Starting where we have three items in our public hearing, starting with item F1. This agenda item is with regard to the use permit for 304 O'Keefe Street. At this public hearing, the commission may consider and adopt a resolution to approve a use permit for a new two-story residence on a substandard with regard to lot width and area in the R1U, or Single Family Urban Residential Zoning District, and determine this action is categorically exempt under CEQA guidelines sections 15303's Class 3 exemption for new construction or conversion of small structures. The proposal includes an attached accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, which is not subject to discretionary review. The project includes one development-related heritage tree removal, which was reviewed and conditionally approved by the city arborist. Ms. Khan, I believe you are the staff representative on this project, and that the applicant has a presentation to make, is here and has presentation to make as well. Okay, great. Before we bring the applicant up, are there any updates or additions to the staff report?
Yes. Good evening, Chair, fellow commissioners, members of the public, and anyone in attendance. Staff has the following updates on the project. Staff received an email from a Chandler Eason, property owner at 312 O'Keefe Street, which is the property to the rear of the subject property. He had some clarifying questions about where the proposed ADU would be and why the proposal is for a 3,600 square foot residence. Staff responded to the ADU that the ADU would be on the left of the proposed residence facing O'Keefe Street, and that properties are allowed attached or detached ADUs. Additionally, the state allows 800 square foot over the maximum floor area limit to accommodate ADUs. The neighbor also pointed out 2 trees that are being removed, which have been done so with a heritage tree removal permit. He has also mentioned the flood zone. The property was in the 100-year flood zone and has been recategorized with a surveyor's letter, which removed the existing structure from the flood zone. Although the staff report does not include the section or paragraph on the flood zone, the proposed resident would meet the requirements. The base flood elevation for 304 O'Keefe is 29.5 feet. The proposed residence's finished floor would be a foot over the BFE at 30.5 feet. His email is available for anyone in attendance who would like to see it at the back of the chambers. Lastly, staff incorrectly mentioned that the converted garage ADU may not have received permits. After publication, due to clerical and filing error, it was missed. The conversion was done with permits and approved by the city back in 2018. The property owners, Rohit and Shruti, are here in person, and their architect team, Subhendu and Roy, are joining us virtually tonight. We do have a presentation from the applicant team. With that, I conclude staff updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Then I think we can go ahead and welcome the applicants, a combination, it sounds like, of the owners and their architect team.
Future architects.
Thank you. Let's just be sure, can we just check and be sure the microphone is working well? We want to be sure everybody can hear you.
Good. I want to make sure it's on the call too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So confirming that our architect's on the call. So I'm Rohit Khare. I'm the applicant. I've seen some earlier correspondence on the file that had the name of one of the parks at Livio. Livio is the company we're working with. Subhendu is on the call as our great contact there. Staff could put their presentation on screen. I can briefly introduce our project and what's prompted us working on it. I'm here with one of the families coming in. Everyone's running around playing soccer practices. We've been in the Willows for about 15 years. We've raised our family there. We picked it up from the prior family. We've gotten to know them well too. They were it's quite a heritage we have here. So this is an address on a corner lot. If we could advance the next slide, please. A little about us is that we've, of course, had 3 kids since we moved in. We've had my mother-in-law move from Australia to live with us. We have my mother and my former father also moved into a house. We helped them move in about 2 blocks away, also in the Willows. But we are definitely bursting at the seams. The house is from '54, not to mention the usual risks and infrastructure challenges that come with the structure of that age. It's got some poor flow and natural lighting, and it's kind of hard to renovate because it's not where the current setbacks would normally lie on its foundation. The new project we're proposing here would allow us to have a separated ADU for multi-generational living, and it allows us to have some design features that we like as well for intergenerational living that allows us to have a courtyard where we can still interact with them, as well as have separate spaces for the kids upstairs. As a result, you can see some statistics there about the basic project, but here's where I'd like to hand off to Subhendu if we can. If we have some glitches, we'll take back over. Would you mind picking up from here? And I can tell them in advance and
Sure.
you're done with this one.
Hope I'm audible to all the commissioners and people at the council.
Yes, you can proceed. Should we go to the next slide yet?
Sure. Thanks, Rohit. A very good evening to all the commissioners present. Taking off from here, this is the current view of the house at O'Keefe Street. As mentioned, this is a 2-storied home with an ADU, garage converted into an ADU. Very old structure in a dilapidated condition, you can see, and we have tried to maintain the exact location of the house as much as possible in the new design. Going to the next slide. Taking inspiration from the urban context of Menlo Park, there are other 2-storied modern homes as well in the neighborhood. As you can see, marked in green are all the 2-storied homes right next to our proposed property. Next. Again, given the urban zoning and the urban context overall of the city of Menlo Park, a contemporary style here offers a very harmonious blend of the modern aesthetics and functionality. Our project overall, positively contributes to the architectural landscape of this community, where we have tried to use different materials to bring a different gradation using different materials like sidings, stucco, plaster, and paint. Going to the next slide. This is the front elevation that can be seen right from the O'Keefe Street. The material board is as presented. This offers the difference in the roof levels can be seen here. And this is the first floor level plan where we can see the attached ADU. There's 2 separate entrances can be seen. While the garage entrance is from the Laurel Avenue, as this is a corner lot, the main entry is from O'Keefe. While the ADU also has a separate entrance, which is taken behind here with a short ramp, staircase, and enters into the ADU entrance. Going next. On the level 2, we have all the bedroom units, which is 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bath. And minimal windows are provided on the rear side, so there is absolute privacy to any neighbors, no direct window overlooking the neighbor. This is the front elevation on the garage side. Again, you can see a blend of all materials aesthetically chosen. Next. This is on the other rear elevation side, demarcating the entrance of the ETU. This is the rear view side, again, where you can see that there are minimalistic windows provided across with no direct access or view. So talking about the landscape diagram quick, we had 5 trees assessed on the properties, 3 of which are outside of the property itself. That's number 3, 4, and 5, which is marked in yellow. The first 2 trees were proposed removal. The first was dead already. The second one was in a poor condition, and citing the new building envelope, it had to be proposed remove, which has been approved already, as mentioned at the start. And accordingly, for the remaining, we have provided sufficient replacement trees as demarcated here in colors, which provides a great streetscape aesthetic. Next, this is again the rear view, as can be seen from a neighbor's lot, where there will be the proposed fence, which demarcated transparent white, and the existing 2 palm trees, tree number 4 and 5, which also covers the part of the bedroom window, and a proposed fruit tree that is to be planted at that place as per the landscape plan. Going next. We have our continued efforts ever since we started designing with our clients in 2022, and we first submitted it to the City Council in November 2022. We sent out the outreach letter personally hand-delivered to each of the 11 houses in neighborhood, explaining our design intent and seeking their feedback. As we move forward in the process and with the comments and feedback from our neighborhood, we again made modifications to the design that can be seen through our journey in adopting multiple strategies to improve the aesthetics. We once again sent out our letter to neighbors explaining the changes that have been done as per the city's recommendations. Finally, in the third notice went to the neighbors on March 13, 2025 about the Planning Commission meeting along with the new set of plans. Additionally, we have personally delivered to all the neighbors of updated renderings that you saw today on the presentation through our letter on March 24th. That is, again, got us great feedback from all our neighbors. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity, and thank you all the planners and staff members who has helped us get approved till this stage. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I think that concludes the presentation. Thanks. That concludes any presentation.
Thank you. Then we will, so just hang on just a moment in case our commissioners have any clarifying questions, either for staff or for the applicant. Commissioners will do clarifying questions before we move to public comment. No clarifying questions from Commissioner Silverstein.
Yeah, just one quick question for the applicant. Starting the project before 2022 and now coming before us in 2025 seems like a relatively long time. We continue to think about what types of things we can do to expedite the various process. Were there factors that are theoretically in control of the city that might help speed things along, or was it just externally on why things took so long?
I don't know if staff still has the presentation up, or it doesn't matter if we have to do it. We had a bit of a timeline. I would say there are certainly some lessons learned on all sides. We definitely wanted to work with a more innovative approach with steel framing. We chose a developer who has experience throughout Silicon Valley and with several nearby municipalities that have equally strict requirements. But I think it's been a strong combination of evolving requirements and evolving changes in city and state, especially state law. The chance to redesign it around the 4-foot setback for an ADU kind of helped us remass that project and consolidate it on one side of the property, in some ways to clear up some space towards one of the neighbors. Also, during this long duration of the project, some of the trees that our previous owners had planted, one of them passed away, and that tree had one we had designed the entire approach and parking around. And so then to do that and relay out the property, so it hopefully will probably come back as probably like 704 or something like Laurel Street, the Laurel Avenue. I apologize. This is Laurel Street we're on now. Because reorienting the property, so that was one thing done second round. But mostly, I think it's a process where we've done a lot of iteration, and I think the city has been extremely helpful at times on showing what's possible and what can be allowed. Thanks.
Further clarifying questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you. We'll go ahead and call for public comment, and then the process is that we'll go back and have a discussion with amongst up here on the dais with the commissioners. Mr. Pruder, could you please call for public comment on item F1?
Yes, thank you, Chair Schindler. At this time, we have public comment for item F1.
You're welcome to sit. Sorry.
Thank you. And any members of the public in person wishing to provide public comment, please feel free to fill out a comment card at the back of the council chambers and provide it to me. You'll be able to speak in person. For those on Zoom, please press the hand icon and you'll be able to speak via Zoom. And those who are calling by phone, please press *9 on your keypad and we'll be able to accommodate your commenting as well. I don't see any hands raised at the moment or comment cards, so we could wait a little longer if you'd like. Thank you.
Okay, I'll give it one more moment. Do we have any hands raised at this time?
We still do not. Thank you.
All right, then I will go ahead and, excuse me, close public comment and bring the conversation back to the dais for commission discussion and ultimately a motion with regard to the use permit. Commissioners have comments or questions? Commissioner Doe.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I really appreciated the presentation, the renderings, the perspective, the elevation, the presentation was different from what was shown in the staff report, which is totally fine, but it was helpful to see the design that is envisioned. I do actually have a question. This is based on a drawing in the staff report, so I don't know if it's through the chair to the applicant, if this is the latest, but it's the on page 31 of the staff report. It's the colored front elevation, and there appears to be a solid fence across the front of the house. And so I was just curious, just visually, it seems very, just what is the nature of the fence? Is it looks pretty solid, or is it more open? It can maybe to the architect, can you explain?
Yeah.
That
No, of course, we are not having a complete fence. Sorry for the error in the rendering, that it has been extruded to the entire portion. We have our entry for the main door entry right from the street. So there is a direct entrance, as you have seen in the newer renderings. If you look at the landscaping drawings and stuff, it clearly shows the approach. So yeah, we are not putting the fence throughout that area. It is, again, if referring to the landscape plan, you can see the demarcated fence area, which is on the only in the remaining rear side of the lot to cover that.
Okay, so just to reiterate what you said, I'm just trying to understand the street experience as one's walking along the property. There's not this solid, continuous, opaque fence along the street.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that's.
And you said on which page can I, in our staff?
It will be on the landscaping plan.
Okay, and is that that's in here?
It's the 32, page number 32.
Okay, great. I'll take a look. Thank you. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just ask a follow-up question on that. So is there any fence? It's a little hard to tell from the landscape.
Yeah, if you take a look at the north side of the property where the rear yard is, correct, and zoom into it, you'll see the fence line that has been shown there. which moves alongside this thing. Where we are covering it behind, because it will be better detailed through in the next set of permitting, where we'll label if it is 8 feet fence, the 7 feet fencing towards the rear side, and in the front it's 3 feet in height.
And again, I'm sorry. Thank you for the clarification. I think it would also be helpful when we're referring to front and back and right and left, if we could just clarify, particularly if there's a street side, because I think given that this is a corner lot and that the orientation of the home has been changed with this development, it's just good to clarify whether we're talking about exactly what we're talking, which lines we're talking about, which of the 4 sides of the property is being discussed.
On the front side, of course, we are not putting up as what the question was. Of course, we have the vision triangle also at the corner, so there is no fence coming up, or we are putting anything across these areas in the front.
Okay,
What
so
is that?
for the sake of my complete clarity, there is no fence along either O'Keefe or Laurel at all. Okay, I'm sorry. Please clarify.
Yes, that's good.
Cut off.
I
There you
couldn't
go.
speak. So, sorry. To clarify, you saw in the renderings is probably the most accurate. The corner side vision triangle does not currently propose any fencing. There is an existing condition, which is the backyard is fenced in. So there is a fence that's going to go along O'Keefe, probably about a third of the property until where it really begins. It's exactly the current fence location. The fence with the 707, which is the fence on the rear of the what we consider the right side of the property, where's the driveway where the magnolia tree is, that is in poor condition and it has not followed the property line, but we have not proposed to change or disturb that if at all possible, unless construction reveals something else, because that neighbor would like to preserve that fence as it is and the heights where admittedly possible. The fence to the rear of the property, the current side yard of the property, the backyard logically, is incorrect. And that has been so for some years. The tree was planted, the pine tree that's been in question has been planted on our side of the property line. It's a sewer easement and the fence is on our side of the easement. So that will also get rebuilt. So the bottom line is fenced in backyard for the property. That fence continues on O'Keefe and it comes into our property. But we have designed it to be aesthetically approvable and be interesting without any fencing on the corners. Over time, who knows, change, but there's main entry steps and the approach for pedestrians is from O'Keefe. There's also the approach for cars from Laurel, and there's the approach to the ADU from the rear on O'Keefe. So that's why we've kept that open.
Thank you for clarifying. So the fence that will be on O'Keefe will not continue to be in front of the front entrance?
Largely resembles the existing condition fence for exactly that reason.
Okay.
That's correct.
Commissioner Doe, did that address your question?
Actually, it did, because I
Okay.
looked at the street view to see where the existing fence on O'Keefe is, and in the landscape plan, I see where the fence posts are, and I find that reassuring, especially there was a public comment letter about the massing and the appearance of the project, and I feel like for me, that solid fence was a little worrisome, but the fact that it is not all the way across, thank you for clarifying. So
Yeah,
thank you, Chair.
that error is in the materials board slide that you found and on the cover image for convenience's sake. But we've thought a lot about that too for that same reason, that we have other properties in the immediate vicinity that are kind of really hemmed in by hedges and so on, and we've been considering that, what we would like to do. Thanks for the discussion.
Do other commissioners have questions or thoughts? Commissioner Sellen.
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair, this is a question for staff about, I guess what was mentioned in the email from the neighbor regarding the setback. So yeah, it seems like the setbacks are based on a frontage being Laurel, but the address is O'Keefe. Could you clarify that, please?
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioner Sillen. That's a good question. Corner properties have the ability to face the entryway on either side of the property, and they are also permitted to have property addresses based on, depending on which street they're facing. So although the property is addressed as O'Keefe, the property line, the front lot line of the property is considered along Laurel. And based on the definition that we have in our municipal code of front lot lines, it says that when the property is a corner property, the shorter street side is considered the front of the property. So address can be anywhere, entryway could face either side.
Thanks. So just to clarify, is it that the applicant gets to choose, or is it based on the shorter side?
So the shorter side is the front lot line of the property. The applicant can choose to face either the front of the property or the corner side. And the address can be whichever the applicant chooses.
Got it.
And delivery, because we are not in a multiple unit area. So one of the reasons has been the continuing ambiguity of receiving mail and junk mail for 304 and 304A. We were talking about separating out future uses so that the ADU keeps it 304A, and if the postal service permits. That was just a statement of convenience. It's clearly not relevant to the file. Everything about tracking this project will remain 304 O'Keefe. But I've noticed several approved projects where this has happened on corner lots in Menlo Park. And it's actually helped kind of reset the real estate history of these places too. But we shall see. Thank you so much for that clarifying question.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have any other questions, and my comment is that I generally like this project. I think it's great that you've lived in the neighborhood for so long and you want to accommodate your larger family. I think as neighbors, that's what we would want as a homeowner, improving their lot the way they see fit. And from what I saw on the spec sheet, everything is within our zoning requirements. So I'm happy to support this project, but want to hear what other commissioners have to say. Thank you.
Do other commissioners have questions or comments? All right. I will take the opportunity just to say a couple of things then. I found myself toggling back and forth between a couple of pages, trying to make a little bit of sense of a couple of the window diagrams. Perhaps just a clarification that there are windows in the bedroom closets for bedroom 2 and bedroom 1. Is that correct?
No, those are alcoves for study. In fact, it's a design feature that the original owners put in '64 when they built the upper story. The closets are to one side and the windows are on the void next to it as the entry into the twins' shared Jack and Jill bathrooms. Subandhu can please clarify if there's further technical accuracy.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
not, thank
That's
you.
not in the
That's-
code.
Yes, it's hard to tell where, because particularly in the front, on that side of the house, which is essentially the bottom on this page, because there are two windows on top of each other, and it looks like it's hard to tell where the windows are. Thank you for clarifying that one. I found myself toggling back and forth, just as I said, between some of the street views and the plans, seeking to understand the windows. I think the layout of the house makes a lot of sense, especially given the explanation of how you have been using it and how you intend to use it in the future. So I think functionally it makes a ton of sense. I am not an architect or a designer, so I may not have the best ways of describing my only concerns with these plans, which is the windows. To my layperson eyes, the shapes and positionings contribute to a kind of disjointed and disorganized sensation from the outside for me. I would hope for more sort of consistency of alignment, for example, between the first and second floor, or shapes and orientation. To me, it feels just a little, I guess, just disjointed. That's not basis for preventing for my desire to prevent the project to moving forward. It's simply feedback from reading through the plans. I see no other comments or questions from commissioners. Do we have a motion with regard to the use permit? Commissioner Sellen.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the project as presented today.
We have a first and a second from Commissioner Baruzzi. If there's no other discussion, I will go ahead and call the vote. Commissioner Baruzzi.
Yes.
Commissioner Doe. Vice Chair Eric.
Sorry, yes, my microphone wasn't.
I heard you. Vice Chair Eric.
Yes.
Commissioner Farrick.
Yes.
Commissioner Sellen.
Yes.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Yes.
And I am also a yes. That is 7 yeses. Congratulations. Thank you for being here this evening. Oh, please.
I would just like to make one comment quickly, which is that we got that letter from a neighbor today making a comment about how ADUs should be attached or detached or not just for the purpose of making a house bigger. And I just want to emphasize again how much I appreciate knowing the story that sparked these changes and how great it is that you can have your mother living with you. And I think that's one of the great reasons that we have laws that allow this kind of flexibility. And I just wanted to name that because we haven't said that yet. And I appreciate that you're going to have this great multi-generational family.
We converted our garage to an ADU with the right permits a few years ago, and my mom's been living there since. And it was a blessing during COVID, but also the isolation was great because it meant that we got COVID and she didn't. So I think it's been very special for that reason.
Thank you. Congratulations. With that, we will go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda, item F2, which is the use permit revision for 842 Hermosa Way. At this public hearing, the commission may consider and adopt a resolution to approve a use permit revision for an existing 2-story single-family residence with a basement, excuse me, on a substandard lot in the RE or residential estate zoning district. The original use permit was granted in 2006, and the proposed revisions include a second-story addition above the existing attached garage and along the west or left side, and determine this action is categorically exempt under CEQA guidelines, sections 15-301's Class 1 exemption for existing facilities. Mr. Pruder, I believe you are speaking on behalf of, you're the staff planner for this evening, and then the applicant is here as well. Before we turn it over to the applicant for remarks, are there any updates or additions to the staff report?
Thank you and good evening again, Chair Schindler. There are no updates at this time, but yes, to clarify, we do have the applicant team comprised of the project architect and ownership as well. The property owners are here tonight, and so I will leave the floor to them, but definitely before that, happy to answer any questions that any of you commissioners may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, we'll let the applicant go ahead, and then we'll do clarifying questions, and then finally we'll move on to public comment.
Okay. Good evening. Is this on?
I think that's working. Maybe I'm going to raise it up just a little bit.
Okay. My name's Caroline Latis. I'm the architect and applicant for this project. I'm joined this evening by the homeowners, Kathleen and Robert Anderson. At this time, there are no updates or changes to what's been presented in the agenda documents that you have in front of you. It's a small 279 square foot second story addition above the existing garage. And I am happy to take any questions from the commissioners or the public.
Thank you. Do commissioners have any clarifying questions for the applicant or for staff before I move to public comment? All right, seeing none. Mr. Pruder, could you please go ahead and provide instruction and open general public comment on F2?
Yes, thank you, Chair Schindler. At this time, we have public comment for item F2. And any members of the public in person, please feel free to fill out a comment card from the back and bring it to me to speak publicly. Also, alternatively, those on Zoom can press the hand icon, and that will notify us that you'd like to speak as well. And then lastly, for those on the phone, you can press *9, and you will also be able to speak on this item. And at this time, I do not see any hands raised or comment cards. We can wait a few moments more if you'd like. Thank you.
I think we're okay. Let's go ahead and close public comment on F2 and bring the item back to the dais for commissioner comment, questions, anything particular. Commissioner Silverstein.
I recognize that the Planning Commission is not a policy setting body, but the reason why this item is before us in the first place is because in the RE zoning district, the lot width has to be a minimum of 110 feet, and this lot is 108.4 feet. If that were not the case, then we would not need to do this. And I don't believe it is within the spirit of our zoning code to object to various additions as a function of 1.6 feet. And as such, I would not feel comfortable doing anything than voting yes on this project.
I second the motion.
I'm not sure, was that actually a motion?
I'm very happy to move to approve the permit.
Okay, we have a first from Commissioner Silverstein, and I believe a second from Commissioner Farrick to approve the motion to grant the use permit as proposed by staff. But I want to be sure that if there is further discussion, that happens. Okay, seeing no hands raised and no requests for further discussion, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Commissioner Baruzzi.
Aye.
Commissioner Doe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric.
Yes.
Commissioner Farrick.
Yes.
Commissioner Silverstein. Sorry, Commissioner Sillen.
Aye.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Yes.
I am also a yes, so that is 7 yeses. Thank you very much. We wish you the best of luck with your renovation. Thank you for being here this evening. Good luck. All right, we will.
Through the chair,
Please.
may I ask a post that item question of staff in terms of, it does feel like an unfair burden on properties that get caught up in this sort of thing. I've never seen in the, I guess now 10 aggregate years on the Planning Commission, such a small thing that we'd had to, like this. So I guess I'm, I'd love for staff to discuss with council when and if we might be able to not have to force residents to go through a lengthy, expensive process for these sorts of situations.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for the comments. One question we did open public comment. Is that, was distracted by an email here?
We did have
Okay,
public
okay.
comment and had no comment cards or hands raised on
Okay,
Zoom.
great.
Yes.
Thank you for confirming. Yeah, we understand certainly the message. I think, for any use permit, of course, it's the findings that need to be made, and it may be easier to make the findings for approval if it's a lot that's only slightly substandard.
If I may, I can reflect something that is in the public record from City Council's meeting on Saturday where they were discussing priorities for the coming year. This topic was referenced as something that had been brought up recently and also something that had been brought up in years in the past. So there was some discussion just of it, whether it belonged in as a priority or not, and how it intersected with other things that are currently on the city's list of priorities. To my recollection of that public meeting, there was no conclusion reached, but it was certainly a point of discussion. Commissioner Sullen.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just briefly go on record supporting what Commissioner Silverstein said, or being in agreement, and supporting the effort from council to prioritize streamlining situations like this where it seems burdensome to have to come to us for approval to expand a closet. Thank you.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Yeah, this is a question for staff. On the formal roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission, it does say that the commission serves as a recommending body to the City Council for a number of things, including zoning ordinance amendments. And my question is, what is the forum? What is the appropriate forum for the Planning Commission to advise the City Council for zoning ordinance amendments? Is there an opportunity for the Planning Commission to formally discuss, maybe have it on the agenda, propose, submit something to City Council to say we, as the Planning Commission, have gathered community feedback and have, and formally recommend X, Y, and Z for City Council to then even know that this is something that they should be asking further of staff or anything like that? Because theoretically, they might not necessarily know what the recommendations would be a priori.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think certainly that part about recommending for zoning ordinance updates, I think that's generally for projects. For example, the Parkline project I'm working on will have a zoning ordinance update and rezone. So then the Planning Commission would make a recommendation on that. So in that case, it's proposed by the applicant. I think certainly a goal-setting session by the City Council, individual commissioners may speak, and as a resident. We can look into more as if speaking as a commission. I think that is generally it is commissioners who speak as individuals at City Council meetings, like the goal-setting.
Can I follow up?
Let me just confirm with Ms. Sandemeyer that I want to be sure that we are within the boundaries of discussing agendaized topics. Is this still acceptable? And there we go. There's the city attorney. Hi.
Thank you for the question. And hi, everyone. I'm Mary Wagner, Assistant City Attorney. So I think we are getting a little far afield. I understand the connection, to the project that you just had in front of you, and being curious about a process to make recommendations to the City Council. We can certainly return to you with more information if you would like. I have seen jurisdictions that will have their Planning Commission make recommendations perhaps in advance of something like the meeting that the council had on Saturday. But again, that's something we can look into for you and provide additional information if you would like in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. As always, I'm impressed by the integrity and the thoughtfulness of the questions that come from this Planning Commission, even when they're not exactly about the content of the staff report. We're always thinking ahead. Thank you to my peers. I think we'll now go on to the final item in our public hearing, which is F3, the use permit with regard to 3565 Haven Avenue. In this public hearing, the Commission may consider and adopt a resolution to approve a use permit for the use and storage of hazardous materials associated with a research and development business located in the M2 or General Industrial Zoning District, and determine this action is categorically exempt under CEQA guidelines, sections 15301's Class 1 exemption for existing facilities. Mr. Pruder, I believe you are the planner on this project. And we have the applicant here as well with some slides to present. Before we turn it over to the applicant, are there any updates or additions to the staff report that the Commission should be aware of?
Thank you, Chair Schindler. At this time, we have no updates for this item. But yes, as you had mentioned a moment ago, we do have an applicant representative for the project at hand, and I will be sharing the screen for the applicant here to guide me through as we walk through this presentation. And first and foremost, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Then we can proceed with the presentation. Thank you.
All right, please go ahead. We'll love to see your presentation, and then we'll do clarifying questions if there are any from the commissioners before we move into public comment. Thank you.
Commission members, I think I'm here My name is Myung Chung. I'm the VP of Operations at Allegan, and we're a small biotech company that I joined about 2.5 years ago. When I joined, we were 25, and today we are right at 100. And so we've grown over the past couple of years, and we're looking to set up shop here in Menlo Park. We had 2 smaller facilities in San Carlos that we're in the process of shutting down and are looking to do great things at our new home here at 3565 Haven. If we can go to the next slide, please. Maybe skip this one. Thank you. And so just wanted to provide an overview of who Allegan is, what we do, and why we want to be in this ecosystem in Menlo Park as well. Allegan is a synthetic biology company. There's a lot of words on this slide, and so feel free to read through them. But the essence to take away is we are a tools provider in the synthetic biology space. We manufacture DNA that is of high quality in a fully synthetic manner. A lot of our industries that utilize our product, if we can go to the next slide here, range from companies that are doing basic research to infectious disease. We have the power to fuel novel therapeutics like cell and gene therapies that are on the market today, support biomanufacturing and alternative meats, right? We've also got the ability to support really the global demand of DNA consumption that is starting in our synthetic biology ecosystem. One of the major targets that we're going after, or industries that we're going after, is really in the mRNA space, and this is both on the vaccination side as well as on the therapeutic side. And so with Allegan's quick, easy DNA that can build anything from short 300 base pair fragments of DNA all the way down to 7,000 base pairs within about a week's time, we're able to accelerate the discovery loop for these therapies. Allegan is, I guess, the second time that I'm building a home at Menlo Park. The first time it was through a company called Grail. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they're in the Tarleton Labs, about 1.5 miles away from where Allegan is today. I was working on the early detection of cancer. Post-Grail, I went to a company called Arsenal Bio, where I was working on actually the treatment of cancer. And so I said, okay, detect cancer early, great. Now you need a better treatment method. And I generally am with the companies through their build phase as they go from true R&D into the clinic. Allegan is a little bit different because we have products on the market, and with the DNA that we provide, we can fuel everything from early detection all the way to cancer therapies. And so we have a cool technology that allows us to produce DNA quickly, efficiently, and accurately. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so all of the work that we do is in class 1 biosafety level laboratories. As you can see, none of this is enclosed. All of the devices that we see are actually off-the-shelf biotechnology devices that we put into specific configurations on kind of the aluminum skeletons that you can see there, supported by a robotic arm in the middle that just moves different plates and reagents from one place to another. And so we have a fully automated workflow system that is going to fuel our production suite. And that's just an image of what a production suite kind of looks like for us. If we can go to the next slide, please. The next couple slides are really just the excerpts from the comments that we got from via email, I believe. And it just highlights some of the risks that public felt about us being a biotech and utilizing some chemicals for our research work and production work. If we can go to the next slide. These are the 3 topics that were kind of at the base of the email that I'd like to address in the remaining time that I have today. Most of it was just around what the types of chemicals that we're using, as well as how we're going to use them here at the site. And so if we can go to the next slide. Directly addressing question 1 and 3, this was how did we inform the general public? I personally did not go door to door informing the general public. We left that up to the staff here who notated these things in the staff report as well. Question 2 was really around safety protocols, and that's where we come in. And so at Allegan, building world-class labs is not something that we just do on the side. We want to make sure that our employees are also working in a safe environment. And so the safety measures that we implement include full chain of custody of chemicals, even the ones that are non-regulated, from procurement to delivery to disposal. And so we have full, I guess, visibility in that supply chain. The Yeah, there are also, for point B there, engineering controls that we put in place to ensure that disposal is happening properly. And when people are utilizing the materials, that they are being thoughtful about the correct volumes and the correct materials and the reactivity to the various compounds that are being worked on at the same time. Can go to the next slide, please. The rest of my presentation really just is around either the process controls or the engineering controls that we have in place to ensure a chain of custody for the materials that we utilize. On the left side, in bullet point number 1, really is just a chemical safety cabinet. And so all of our materials that are rated as hazardous will end up in a cabinet like this, centrally managed in a warehouse. That cabinet, it's a little hard to tell, but it's about 5.5 feet tall, maybe 2 feet wide, and we have a few of those on site. The second one is a picture of what it looks like inside. And so as you can see, each of these bottles, and this is for reagents that are new, are organized by type as well as by, I guess, first in, first out principles. And the last one is really what our hazardous material handling waste stream looks like. It's, we have an EH&S program in-house that identifies any hazards as we bring them into the workflows that our researchers are using, as well as figuring out what the disposal looks like. And we're in compliance with all regulatory bodies to do this. The waste containers are obviously labeled with the contents of the material, with the hazards that are associated with it, and we work with a vendor called ACT to dispose of them properly. Next slide, please. These are a few of the engineering controls that we have, and then one last picture that I'll touch on. The first one is a chemical safety cabinet. So we're working with these liquids in actually very low volume. And so I'm not sure how easy it is to imagine microliter amounts, but if you imagine just a drop of liquid, that's a few microliters there. And so the major use case for what we do utilizes anywhere from single-digit microliters all the way up to milliliter level. And I'd say even at the milliliter level, we're significantly diluting a lot of these somewhat harmful chemicals. The chemistry, the hoods that you see on that left side are venting to the outside. They are also filtered, and so we have clean air coming in to the building, as well as venting any aerosolized harmful products outside. The lab coats and the safety showers are just images of our space where we employ PPE. And then the last picture is actually a picture of one of the devices that we utilize within the process. It's a little hard to see, I guess, with the light, but that's my finger there next to one of the bottles that we use. And the liquids there are diluted about 1 in 10,000 fold. And so we take about 1 microliter of the chemicals in some of the cabinets that you've seen or the pictures that you've seen, and then dilute those down significantly. And so at that point, it is almost not a hazardous waste stream, but we make sure that we pack everything out through our vendor ACT. So next slide, please. So I think these are just the recommendations from the staff report that we also agree with. We believe that the scope of work that we have with on-site at the Menlo Park facilities are going to be in compliance with all other, I guess, zoning or regulatory requirements that allow for this type of research to happen. So I think that concludes the slides.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Do commissioners have any clarifying questions for the applicant or for staff before we move to public comment? Okay. I see none, so we'll go ahead and go to public comment, and then if we have discussion, we may invite you back to the podium. Mr. Pruder, could you please provide instructions and open public comment on this item F3?
Thank you, Chair Schindler. Again, at this time, we have public comment for item F3. And again, additionally, any members of the public here in person can provide a comment card from the back and provide it to me to provide public comment in person. And we also can provide public comment via Zoom by pressing the hand icon on the Zoom interface, and by phone by pressing *9. And at this time, I don't see any hands raised. I've not received any comment cards, so we could wait for a moment if you'd like to confirm this. Thank you.
I think at this point it's appropriate to go ahead and close public comment. So we'll close public comment on item F3 and bring it back to a commission discussion and ultimately a motion on the use permit. Who would like to begin? Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks. This one's for staff. I'm thinking about the threshold. So the levels of the list of hazardous materials, is that meant, actually it could be for you, either one. Is there enough headroom in those thresholds or amounts that would enable the company to operate for a period of time? And if so, like roughly what is that time if you stayed on the growth trajectory that you're on?
Yes. Hello. We scoped the chemicals that we submitted on the plan for about 5 years out when the building would be at max capacity, and that's well within the limits of the space itself.
Great, thank you. And then one kind of maybe comment feedback for staff is that one of the exhibits in the report, it was too blurry to read. Luckily, there was a different table lower down that I think was the same, but I really couldn't tell. I do have bad vision, but just kind of feedback that there was I couldn't read. I don't know if that was me or if it was my computer, but okay. Yeah, that's all I had for questions. I'm happy to make a motion when the time is right.
Thank you. Commissioner Sellen.
Thank you. Just a quick note that on the hazardous materials information form question 2, it mentioned storing things in flammable cabinets, which sounded pretty scary, but I think based on your pictures, they are actually fireproof cabinets with the word flammable on them. Yes.
The cabinets themselves are not flammable, yes.
Yeah, so I guess my general comment is I found it hard to like review this project because it is pretty much boxed in on 3 sides by residences within 1,000 feet. And I appreciate all the pictures and evidence of safety. It all looks like top-notch, equipment and everything. I just, as a planning commissioner, I have no sort of relative basis to say like, well, that's not good or that's good. I guess I'm going to rely on all the other agencies that seem to have signed off on this project, as well as the recommendation from staff. I'm certainly not going to present myself as an expert on, toxic materials. I think I would just like to ask, I have 2 questions. The first, I think, would be, maybe both for the applicant through the chair. The first would be if there is some sort of spill or toxic vapor released, some sort of accident, is there some sort of notice process for nearby residents? How does that get treated?
Sure. I think under the amounts of chemicals that we're holding within the facility, we are not in, I guess, a state where that is necessary. We do have internal controls in place to make sure that we have an urgent care facility that we can send our employees to, and we have spill control, and we have an escalation path if necessary for larger spills that we cannot contain ourselves.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, then maybe to piggyback off the Commissioner Farrick's question, which is regarding the amounts, is there someone that like verifies every year that that's what you have on hand, like a third-party agency? How does that work?
Not for the total amount of volume that is brought on site, but we do work with like Cal EPA to ensure that we are under permit to manage hazardous waste. Through the waste profiles, they can kind of gauge how much material is being used on site, right? And so there's different levels of waste generators as well. And so we right now classify for a small hazardous waste generator. And so this is no different from your gas stations and oil change centers. Right?
Got it. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think maybe to put the public at ease, just zooming out of all the specific things you went through in your presentation in terms of safety and things like that. Could you just speak to the general level of risk here? Like maybe worst case scenario, what should someone in one of the mobile homes nearby or the apartment buildings be worried about something happening? And if so, what might that be? That would affect, a local resident.
Sure, I think that's somewhat of a very broad hypothetical scenario, but for what we are doing on site, the building itself, 3565 Haven, was I guess, multi-tenant biotech building before, and one of the suites that we're occupying, we're occupying 4 out of the 5 suites, but one of the suites that we were occupying had essentially a competitor to our company who has since left the building, and the amount of chemicals that they were using in that space is, I think we noted in the slide, about 100 times higher than what we are using due to our innovation. And so I think if anything, the risk has gone down for the neighborhood. They are also a couple blocks away, and so it's not like it has left. But with the work that we are doing at 3565 Haven, I believe that the engineering controls themselves, as well as the total volume of materials that we're using, is low enough to where it is not much different from gas cooking at home. From a volatile organic compounds release standpoint, just aerosolization, it is much lower than what you would be exposed to from a gas station just filling your car. To put it also into perspective, some of the chemicals that were identified in the email comment that came through, acetone was on there, and that's a nail polish remover, right? There were, I forget, one of the chemicals there is like essentially like itch cream, right? And so the types of hazards that we use, yeah, if you put on a lot of that or if you pour a lot of acetone out, it's not going to be pleasant. But the amount of volume that we're using is very low and diluted when we use it in process. And so the risks for exposure for the neighborhood, I think, is extremely low.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Appreciate the answer.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Peruzzi.
I have a question for staff. I'm sort of curious about the zoning in that area because we have very recently approved, I think, a housing development there. I mean, Anton Menlo is really close. The trailer park is close. I think we did a general plan update in 2016 where we looked at the M2. Do you know off the top of your head why these 2 sites are still zoned M2, but they weren't zoned, they weren't zoned multi-use, they weren't zoned bio, I can't remember what the designation is on the zoning map. I was trying to look it up, but I'm just sort of curious about the anomaly here. And I'm wondering if you could share if this is what you were envisioning would happen in this neighborhood. It sounds like a company that should exist somewhere, but I'm finding, and I don't find myself comfortable overruling experts, but I'm also not super comfortable, like, would I want my mom living next door? I'm not so sure. So I'd love to hear more about what you were thinking.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we may need to get back to you on kind of the broader question of why some parcels were rezoned and some were not. I think certainly the M2 allows for this type of use through a use permit. It is M2 is an industrial zone. And so this is an industrial kind of use. I think we do have our community development director, Ms. Chow, on the line, and it sounds like she will provide a little broader answer.
Good evening, Commission. Can you hear me, Chair Schindler and members of the Planning Commission?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening. As Ms. Sandmeyer mentioned, I'm Deanna Chow, the Community Development Director. So just a little bit of background. So as Ms. Sandmeyer was mentioning, that is primarily zoned M2. There were a few sites that were rezoned back in 2013, 2014 that have the R4S zoning designation, which is the St. Anton that was mentioned, Elon that was previously produced by Greystar, and then most recently as part of the Connect Menlo zoning, there was some additional updates to allow additional residential mixed use zoning where you've seen now the 3705 Haven Avenue project. And so when we did connect Menlo, there was an update to the process for hazardous materials that was added to the LS Life Science District and the Office District. M2, however, did not get added into that administrative review process, and so it still remains a use permit. So these uses are allowed in those other zoning districts, but it's allowed through an administrative permit process. M2 remains. This is the only area in the city that remains M2, but it didn't get that update to the hazardous materials review, and so it still requires the use permit process. And so as I think some of the commissioners have mentioned, we do rely heavily on our partner agencies, so the fire district, the county, our building department. I believe the applicant mentioned that he works with EPA, and so there are the other partner agencies that we work with who we rely on as being the experts who review the chemical list and the safety measures and protocols that are put in place.
Can I ask a follow-up question while Ms. Chow is on the line? I was looking at the location in San Carlos where this company was previously located, and it is very much like an industrial zone, not a place where we have mixed use and housing. Are there other places in Menlo Park right now where this sort of work is being done that are this close to residences?
Sure. So
science is urgent, but I feel like it's a little bit more sort of set aside.
Thank you, Commissioner Bruzzi. Yeah, so the life science the district, the O district, continues to allow the hazardous materials, and so those do come in proximity to residential uses. So O'Brien Drive shares the backside with the residential neighborhood. In East Palo Alto, the O district borders some of the RMU district, like in Willow Village. So there are areas that do have such uses. I believe Ms. Sandmeyer will be bringing back the Parkline residential mixed use project, and so some of the existing SRI components use hazardous materials, and so we do see that in proximity between residential uses and non-residential uses.
Could I?
Did that Commissioner Baruzzi, did that address your question?
Thank you. Not my concern necessarily, but my question.
Thank you. Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks, and thank you, Commissioner Doe, for letting me, because it kind of is a follow-on to Commissioner Baruzzi's questioning. Caveat, not a hazardous use permit expert by any means. However, I used to see a lot of these. We got a lot more when Tarleton was coming through. And then in professional experience, have learned more about this through the company I work for. And actually to thread the needle, we're kind of lucky that a company, in my view, lucky that a company with such low thresholds that can use this space can do this, because companies with higher thresholds wouldn't be able to take tenancy in a space like this because of sensitive receptors, which means they are not compatible with housing nearby within 100 feet, whatever it might be. And so that they went into this lease knowing that there's residential all around them tells me very clearly that that's not a problem. And they told me that these thresholds are at max capacity. And so, you know, that's why it's actually really small. Plus, also, I should say my husband works in medical device, not anything to do with this, but I think I just have a level of comfort that they deal with little bits of materials all day long. And then that's what scientists do. So it's not scary as long as they're following all the rules and the experts are weighing in and they have all the protocols in place. So that's why I have a level of comfort with it.
Commissioner Doe.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Farrick, for kind of tying it all together, because I felt similarly to Commissioners Baruzzi and Sill, and especially in light of thinking of environmental justice and not wanting to cumulatively add to living by the freeway and all the construction, all the these residents have been living with, and it was a little. I think another thing in addition to what Commissioner Farrick said is, obviously the people who worked there, like they're kind of closer than the residents. So if anything, they would be the first ones to be affected. And not that you'd want it to be, but at least, you obviously have concern for the people who are working there, I would hope. And so obviously the residents would therefore have a level of protection kind of coming naturally out of that. The other thing that I thought was a little interesting was at Connect Menlo, it says that hazardous materials are administratively permitted, sorry, Ms. Chow just said this too, in life science and office, which means it wouldn't go to the public and it wouldn't be publicly noticed. This one is in the older zoning of M2, and so it's conditional use permit, so it came to the public. So to me, it's kind of like, I'm not sure how much the public needs to know, probably the more the better. At the same time, you don't want to alarm them. So it is helpful to get context, like, yes, there's this list of chemicals, but the bleach in your home, maybe, or living next to a nail salon or gas station. It's not really a comment one way or the other. It's just a lot of just generally concern over the community, and appreciate the input from staff and other commissioners. That's kind of, yeah, thank you.
Chair Schindler, if I could just follow
Please.
up on Commissioner Doe's question. So thank you for the comment there. So it is an administrative permit process, but that does not mean that there's not notification. So it does get noticed to the neighborhood. It just doesn't get brought to the Planning Commission. It can be appealed to the Planning Commission, but it does get noticed.
Oh, thank you. So it's the same noticing procedures for everyone living in the same radius. It's just that it doesn't come to like a public hearing. So
That's correct, unless an appeal.
okay, so they can still review like the list of materials just as it was made available in this case.
Yes, they can request to come and look at the file. It is a 1/4 mile noticing radius for
Okay.
hazardous material use.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
I have just a brief question for Mr. Pritter. I think the staff report and many commissioners have already noted the fact that there were 4 agencies that have weighed in here and certified that the applicable codes were met. And we saw the documents in the staff report. My question is just, in the process of requesting those certifications from those 4 agencies, and before they signed off, did they have any questions that they identified? Was there any back and forth or iterations between those 4 agencies and the applicant and staff?
Thank you, Chair Schindler. I can confirm that we received no additional commentary. All the approvals were just approved as is. No conditions were added that were unique to any of the 4 approvals that were given from the agencies. And so we had no additional discussion other than providing the materials, and then they provided their approval letter as is.
Thank you for clarifying that. Do any other commissioners have additional comments or thoughts, questions for the applicant or for staff? Commissioner Sellen.
Thank you. Just a comment. I think I may have trouble verbalizing this, but well, one way I'm looking at it is, yeah, if this was, if I received this notice near my home, I would be concerned. I would maybe spend more time looking through the list and looking at specific things. But if I just sort of zoom out and say, hazardous materials near residents on 3 sides, including a mobile home park, I'm not an expert enough to verify what these levels mean. Even a microliter could be potentially dangerous, probably unlikely, but anyway, I think I'm gonna just zoom out and say hazardous materials. I'm not an expert. I don't think they should be this close to residences. I'm not personally comfortable with it. And that is my position on the project currently.
Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution to approve the use permit for hazardous materials associated with research and development business located in the M2 General Industrial Zoning District at 3565 Haven Avenue, and determine this action is categorically exempt under CEQA guidelines sections 15301, Class 1 exempt for existing facilities.
Thank you. We have a first from Commissioner Farrick
Second.
and a second from Vice Chair Eric. Unless there are other need for discussion or comments. Okay, seeing no hands raised from commissioners, I will go ahead and call the vote. Commissioner Barussi.
Yes.
Commissioner Doe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric.
Yes.
Commissioner Farrick.
Yes.
Commissioner Sillen.
No.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Yes.
And I am also a yes. So that is 6 yeses and 1 no. The resolution carries. Thank you for being here and for your participation this evening. Thank you. Congratulations. All right. That closes the public hearing component of our agenda. We will now move into Section G, or regular business, which is an update on the City of Menlo Park's 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report. Staff is going to lead a review of this report from the general plan with special emphasis on the housing element portion of our general plan and the environmental justice element portion of our general plan. The Planning Commission will consider and adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council accept the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report, including the housing element and environmental justice element. Review of this APR is not a project under CEQA. I believe Mr. Chen and Mr. Smith, I think, is online. Okay, great. Are going to present on behalf of the annual progress report.
Thank you, Chair Schindler, members of the Commission. I'm Calvin Chan, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department. I'm pleased to be here this evening also with Principal Planner Tom Smith, and we will be together presenting about the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report. Next slide. So beginning with a little bit of background, similar to other cities and counties, the City of Menlo Park does have a general plan that serves as our blueprint for meeting our community's long-term vision for the future. This annual progress report, or called the APR for short, provides decision makers as well as our community information regarding the progress for implementation of our general plan and the associated elements. This APR describes the activities of the past calendar year, so for the 2024 year, and it covers all 8 required elements of our general plan that you see shown on our screen. This is the housing element, the environmental justice or EJ element, circulation, noise, safety, open space and conservation, as well as land use. The APR organization that you have in your packet this evening generally follows a recommended approach from the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate and Innovation, LCI, and this is formerly known as the Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. The APR is a document that reflects the past year's general plan related efforts. It's not intended to evaluate or establish current or future work priorities for staff, and the APR will be submitted to the state of California and the various responsible reviewing agencies by April 1st. The Planning Commission is requested this evening to review and to provide a recommendation to the City Council regarding adoption of this APR. So taking a moment here, we will note that while the general plan element reporting for 2024 is described in the body of the APR text, there are 2 elements that have some unique reporting mechanisms, and these are Appendix A as well as Appendix B of the APR. Appendix A is the housing element APR, which has some very specific statutory reporting requirements, as well as using a form that is provided to us by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. Appendix B is the EJ Element APR, which is provided through an update of the EJ Element Action Guide. And the action guide, as a reminder for the commission, is an implementation tool that is separate from the element itself, but complementary, and is a complementary tool to help us manage and coordinate different efforts to accomplish the goals, policies, programs, and action items for advancing EJ in Menlo Park. The next few slides will briefly touch on implementation highlights for the housing and EJ elements, followed by highlights from implementing other elements from our general plan. I'll now turn it over to Principal Planner Tom Smith to guide us through the housing element implementation highlights.
Thank you, Cal, and good evening, Planning Commission. So I'll start with some housing element implementation highlights from 2024. The city's progress in completing its housing element programs is detailed in Table D of the housing element APR form. And just to go over a few highlights from 2024, the city continued to partner with Habitat for Humanity and Rebuilding Together Peninsula on home rehabilitation programs that were funded through the city's 2022 Notice of Funding Availability cycle. In 2024, Habitat for Humanity had 3 qualified applicants move forward into the scoping phase for home rehab projects, and Rebuilding Together Peninsula completed 5 home rehab projects. The city is developing an anti-displacement strategy for Menlo Park, particularly in the Bellhaven neighborhood. Initial implementation of the program began in 2024, and we held some community meetings in English and Spanish to help prioritize community-suggested anti-displacement strategies. Approximately 12 people attended those 2 meetings. And staff will continue to advance the anti-displacement strategy in 2025 with the launch of a community survey. By the end of 2024, Menlo Park's home upgrade program had completed 19 home energy assessments and had 7 signed participation agreements from Bellhaven homeowners to receive energy efficiency and electrification upgrades that will help promote healthier indoor environments. And then the photo on the right shows that the Oak Gardens project groundbreaking in February 2025. Oak Gardens is a new 62-unit apartment community that's located at 795 Willow Road on the VA campus. It's a permanent supportive housing community dedicated to serving veterans, including formerly homeless and imminently homeless veterans, and their families earning between 30 to 50% of the area median income. The project received relevant city permits in 2024, and the city also provided $2 million in funding towards its construction. Next slide, please. In terms of housing production for 2024, this table shows the city's progress in meeting its regional housing needs allocation during the first 2.5 years of the 6th cycle. The yellow columns show the number of units by income level. So it's very low, low, moderate, above moderate, and then a total at the far right. And the top row is the number of units that the city has to achieve by 2031, that 8-year period of the housing element. So when we total those up, you see at the end that it's 2,946 units. The second row shows the units that were permitted in 2024, and that was a total of 176 units. The third row shows the total units permitted since June of 2022, which is the period where we were allowed to start counting for this 8-year cycle. And so we've produced a total or permitted a total of 1,051 units at this time. And then the final 2 rows are the percent complete for the 8-year period. And the last row is the number of units that are remaining to be permitted by 2031 in order to hit 100% complete in each of the income categories. Overall, the table shows that the city is continuing to make progress in a majority of the income categories. So I guess to boil that down, what were the main contributors to the row 2 numbers, which are our 2024 numbers? The first main thing would be accessory dwelling unit production continued to grow in Menlo Park. There was a record 68 ADUs permitted last year. And then the other major project was the Oak Gardens project that I mentioned with 62 units featured in the last slide. And so the combination of ADUs and the Oak Gardens project made up a majority of the 176 units that received permits in 2024. At the 2-year mark of the 8-year cycle, we would expect to see around 25% complete in each of the different income categories. So if you're looking at that 4th row, city is nearly meeting or exceeding that target in the low, moderate, and above moderate categories, while we still see some need at the very low income level, which is around 16% complete. And with that, I will return it to Cal to walk through the remainder of the slides.
Thank you, Tom. So before delving into the EJ Element implementation highlights, I'll just take a quick moment to provide some brief background regarding this newest element to Menlo Park's general plan. So in September 2024, the city adopted its very first EJ, or environmental justice element. This included 7 goals with 3 top community identified priorities, which you see on your screen. The EJ goals include addressing unique and compounded health risks, encouraging physical activity and active transportation, and creating equitable civic and community engagement, among other topic areas. The top 3 community identified priorities are priority number 1, providing safe, sanitary, and stable homes. Priority number 2, promoting access to high quality and affordable food. Number 3, reducing pollution exposure and improving air quality. The updated EJ Element Action Guide, which you have in your packet this evening, provides a broad assessment of all these different activities, implementing all 7 goals with emphasis on the top 3 priorities. Next slide. So take a moment to celebrate some of the highlights for EJ Element implementation in the 2024 year, beginning with the City Council's establishment or approval of a $1 million transfer from the Bayfront Mitigation Fund to establish a new EJ Element Implementation Fund. The city also began development of its anti-displacement strategy for Menlo Park, particularly for the Belhaven neighborhood. The city has conducted ongoing and growing outreach to share housing resources and supporting affordable housing projects, such as the new Oak Gardens project, which Mr. Smith just previewed. The Climate Action Plan also continued to be implemented with a focus on community priorities related to air quality education and outreach. Next slide. Continuing on with some EJ Element implementation highlights, the city's tree team planted new trees along both sides of the US 101 sound walls and throughout Belhaven to reduce noise and air quality impacts. Our Library and Community Services Department also continued providing equitable access to BHCC programs, and in May 2024 established a hyperlocal resident enrollment fee program. As of last month, there are approximately 1,400 people registered in this hyperlocal resident enrollment fee program. Last year, the Belhaven Traffic Calming Project was also completed. This traffic calming project built improvements to help reduce the speeds as well as the cut-through traffic traveling through the neighborhood, particularly in areas near schools. The Community Development Department also worked towards launching a dedicated EJ Element webpage, and this is intended to be a one-stop shop for everything related to advancing EJ in Menlo Park. And our next slide will give a preview of that. So staff is very excited to announce that last week we have a new city webpage. This is menlopark.gov/EJ Element. This EJ Element webpage provides an executive summary of the element, a link to a document, as well as highlighting the top 3 community identified priorities. Each priority tile also links to a separate page where community members can learn more about the goals, as well as how the policies, programs, and action items are being advanced. In a sense, this is providing a condensed version of our overall action guide. The EJ Element webpage also includes various drop-down menus, and one of them includes a link to the complete action guide with all 7 goals and showing activity for implementing all the areas of the EJ Element. Next slide. The APR that you have this evening also highlights other general plan element implementation efforts. For the safety element, there were emergency and disaster preparedness events conducted in multiple timeframes in both English and Spanish. So the city also provided heat relief through multiple cooling centers. Regarding the circulation element, the Vision Zero action plan was adopted last year, and this is really to eliminate traffic fatalities and improve transit for all modes. The Safe Routes to School program continues to be implemented, and we mentioned this evening already the Bellhaven Traffic Calming Project. Regarding the noise element, we also touched upon the planting of the trees along the US 101 highway sound walls, and the city continues to encourage the exploration of alternative payment options. Regarding the combined open space and conservation elements, the city continues to implement our climate action plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. And the city has also coordinated with different agencies for opening of different open space and recreation opportunities, including the Flyway Trail and upgrades to the Willow Oaks Parks, playground and dog park, and also the playground here at Burgess campus. Next slide. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution provided in your packet this evening, recommending that the City Council adopt the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report. The City Council will hold their meeting tomorrow evening at the Bellhaven Community Campus to receive the Planning Commission's recommendation, as well as the Housing Commission's recommendation from earlier this month, and will act on the General Plan APR. That concludes staff's presentation, and we are available if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Do commissioners have any clarifying questions before we do public comment on this item? Vice Chair Eric.
Thank you, Chair Schindler. I have a question. I believe in his presentation, Mr. Smith cited a figure that there had been 68 ADUs permitted during the 2024 period. I'm looking at it's page 174 of the full agenda. It's page A19. I think it was Exhibit A for this item. And in that table, it says there were 57 ADUs permitted. And I apologize for nitpicking, but I would appreciate clarification on what is in fact the correct number.
Sorry, could you repeat what page number you're referring to?
If you're looking at the PDF of the full agenda for today, it's page 174. If you're looking at, I believe, Appendix A of the staff report for this item, it is labeled page A19 at the bottom of that page. And the specific table I'm looking at is the table at the bottom of that page. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So if I recall correctly, there's a little bit of a discrepancy in how some of these units are getting counted. If they're an attached ADU, I think that in some cases they are being lumped in potentially with single family detached, that number there versus a standalone detached ADU gets fully separately counted under that accessory dwelling unit category. I think that might be where the state form has us entering numbers in a very specific way, and so sometimes it doesn't quite capture those totals purely as they if you go through and do the actual counting number by number.
Okay, thank you. That's understandable. And then regarding that same table, I imagine the answer to this question is yes, but I just want to clarify. So in that table, in the permitted column, there's a total of 176 permitted units. I imagine that 176 are the same 176 permitted units that we are getting credit for as a city for 2024 new units for our RHNA goals. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Thank you. That's all my clarifying questions.
Commissioner Silverstein, clarifying questions.
Yeah, of the 176 units that we are getting credit for, looking at that exact same table referenced by Commissioner Eric, as well as the details down in Table A, I'm seeing that 57 of those were single-family detached units. My question is it not the case that when we give a permit to a single-family detached residence, that they are demolishing the existing residence in order to build the new one? And is that accounted for anywhere?
For single-family residences where there is a demolition and then they're rebuilding a single-family residence on the lot, this is a newer change in the way that the reporting is done, but the state asks us to include those units. So they do get counted. We record them. The state wants to see all housing production, including replacement housing. So those numbers are included in what you see under single-family detached. Does that answer the question?
And we are counting those for adding units to Menlo Park's housing supply?
The state, the way that the state form works is that, yes, those units are being included towards our production.
Okay, thank you. My next question is some of those units, I'll use 752 College Avenue, which I know had an ADU in there, lists one unit as above moderate income and another unit as low income. I went back through the agenda packet for that specific unit, and I don't recall. I guess my question is, where did we get low income from for these single-family residences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a new single-family residence with an attached ADU, the way that the methodology works, at least for jurisdictions in San Mateo County for 2024 that the state has approved, a new single-family residence is the one that gets counted as above moderate. And then for all ADUs, there is just a ratio that the state allows us to use, which is 30% very low income, 30% low income, 30% moderate, and then 10% above moderate. And that's based on surveys that have been done in the past, looking at how ADUs are utilized, whether they're rented out. Earlier this evening, there was an example of a family member who is living in an ADU that would otherwise be paying rent. So those kinds of things got factored into a survey, and the methodology works out to 30, 30, 30, 10. And they advise that we just kind of go down the list, not try to say like, oh, this unit is smaller, this unit is larger, but more of just the first 30% are very low generally. The second group are are low, then moderate, and then the final 10% being above moderate. And so that's, if you see two number ones on the same line, it means one of them is going to be an above moderate, the main residence, and then whatever the other one is going to be the ADU and how it got categorized under that methodology.
Thank you.
Are there other clarifying questions before we move to public comment? Yes, Commissioner Sellen, clarifying questions.
Thank you. I was wondering, I see that we're reporting on new units, and there's also a table of applications received. I'm not seeing projects, for example, like 320 Sheridan or the Haven housing project that I know that's this year, 2025, but during 2024, I guess, are they on some sort of pipeline list? Are they included in any of the numbers that we're seeing here?
So table A is a little bit unusual in that the project has to have been deemed complete. It has to have been submitted and deemed complete within the span of 2024. If a project did not get submitted and was not deemed complete in 2024, then it doesn't make it on table A. All projects make it onto table A2, which starts on page A24. And that's where you see the life cycle of a project happen. So if it goes through an entitlement, it's going to be in the orange series of boxes. And then when it finally gets to building permit stage, there's a series of yellow boxes that get filled in. And then finally, once it gets a certificate of occupancy, it goes into the green set of boxes there. And so if you're thinking of a specific project that got entitled during a certain year, it may not fall on table A if it wasn't all sort of taken care of within a single calendar year, but it will eventually show up on table A2 depending on when it gets entitlements, when it gets building permits, and when it gets certificate of occupancy.
Got it. So beyond A2, there's no like summary table that shows, the sum of even just total units at different stages of the pipeline?
No, beyond A2, there wouldn't be a table that would show that. You'd have to go through multiple years of APRs to track that.
Gotcha. I'm also not seeing, well, I'm just doing control find in the PDF. I'm not seeing 320 Sheridan in A2, just as an example. So just a note.
I believe that one received entitlements after. It would have been in calendar year 2025, I think.
Yeah, sorry, did I misunderstand? I thought you were saying that A2 would include projects that hadn't yet been entitled, or is that not correct?
A2 tracks projects that had either a building permit, an entitlement, or a certificate of occupancy in calendar year 2024. Sorry if I didn't specify that clearly.
Okay, so 320 Sheridan was not, I'm assuming it wasn't applied for in 2024, and it hasn't received entitlements yet, so it's probably reported on in the previous year, and now it's just sort of...
So you'll see it in the 2025 APR as receiving entitlements. So next year, you will see 320 Sheridan populated on table A2.
Okay, got it. And then it doesn't count towards RENA until the building permit is issued, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Sorry, one quick follow-up question. In the aforementioned table on page A19 in Appendix A, there is a column called completed. Is that to refer to the building and construction itself being completed, or is that in reference to some other application process?
That means the building has gotten a certificate of occupancy and people are moved in.
Great. My follow-up question is, do we have those same numbers for the entire housing element cycle and not just 2024? So for the 1,000+ units that have been permitted in this cycle, do we know how many of those have been actually completed with that certificate of occupancy?
We don't have that number offhand. We could get that by going back to the 2023 APR and adding that to this number 68 here to get that, but I don't have that right offhand.
If we went back to the 2023 one, then wouldn't it not include units that were permitted in 2023 but then completed construction in 2024? I guess my question is, do we do that eventual next step follow-up to say, okay, we permitted X units, did we actually build those units, and are we also on track for that? Because ultimately, like, I recognize we're beholden to specific numbers, but ultimately the goal is to build the housing, and that would be useful to keep track of for ourselves even if it's not required.
Thanks for that clarification. We do not currently track that to see where projects may have gotten a permit and then there may be a gap of time where they don't start construction for whatever reason or the project falls through. That is not something that we currently track or that the state tracks. We would have to put together a table of that information and do some research to pull that together.
Thank you.
Seeing no further clarifying questions, Mr. Pritter, could you please call for public comment on this item?
Thank you, Chair Schindler. At this time, we have public comment for item G1. Excuse me. Members of the public in person can provide a comment card if there are any comments they would like to provide. And similarly, as a reminder, with those on Zoom, you can press the hand icon to indicate your interest in providing public comment. And lastly, those on the phone, if they're calling, may press *9 on the keypad. I don't see any requests for comments in person or via Zoom or by phone, so we could wait a moment if you'd like or close the public comment period at this time. Thank you.
Let's wait just one more moment. This is a pretty important topic, hopefully. Any hands raised online, Mr. Pritter?
I can confirm I still have no comment cards or hands raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will go ahead and close public comment then on G1 and bring it back to commissioners for further questions or further discussion. I'd actually like to just start off with a couple of quick clarifying questions, just for more context from staff here. So first of all, I think it was a point of pride. So congratulations to city staff and to everyone who was involved across the city that Menlo Park was one of only 47 jurisdictions that actually met its proportional allocation to low income and above moderate, and therefore don't essentially have to be subject to SB 423 or any of the other restrictions that the state has put in place to kind of help be a little bit of a stick in the housing element process. I think it is interesting. I would appreciate more context about how the state is functioning and thinking about these assessments. Clearly, they've done one, as we've been rated in the green, so to say, as a metaphor. But it was hoping staff could comment on how frequently the state is assessing these RHNA compliant targets and more broadly, progress against the housing element. Just to provide us with so we can put this particular report in a broader context of the state's interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to start, and then Mr. Smith may want to join in as well. So you are correct. The SB 423 list, which was previously known as the SB 35 list, lists both jurisdictions that have met the progress toward their RHNA and jurisdictions that have not at various income categories. And for jurisdictions that are not meeting the progress, there's a ministerial approval process for certain qualifying projects that the jurisdiction must comply with. So Menlo Park is not on the SB 423 list. The SB 423 list is compiled midway through the planning period, which for Menlo Park is 2023 to 2031. So I think that's 2027 is the next time that the state would look at the SB 423 list with respect to Menlo Park. And that is what happens for most jurisdictions. It's looked at mid-cycle and then again at the end of the 8-year planning period. The only exception that I'm aware of is the city and county of San Francisco, which there's special statutory language that they are reviewed every year on their progress towards the RHNA for SB 423.
Thank you. So just for complete transparency and clarification for myself, the assessment that we were essentially compliant was based on data through what period?
Through the end of the 5th cycle planning period, which would have been through to the beginning of 2023.
So through the, I'm sorry, you said through the end of 2023?
No, so your fifth cycle planning
Fifth cycle.
period.
Got it.
is-
Just the fifth cycle?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So just to be clear, we would expect assessment mid-cycle, so as you said, 2027, and then assessment again at the end of the sixth cycle, which would be 2031.
Correct.
Okay. I believe that there is legislation being contemplated in 2025 that would change the frequency. And I know that this is a hypothetical, but I would still love if staff could advise or council could advise what the implication would be to Menlo Park of an increased frequency of assessment.
I'd have to review the legislation more closely to give you a very specific answer, but if it means that you're being reviewed for compliance toward RENA on a more frequent schedule for purposes of the SB 423 list, then if your jurisdiction's not meeting progress towards that RENA number, and they literally would divide it by however many years there are in the planning period, divide up your RENA allocation at all income levels across that planning period in those numbers of years, we could find ourselves subject to the SB 423 streamlined ministerial approval process for qualifying housing projects. And those projects would have to include a certain level of affordability. And that level of affordability depends on where we're falling short on the RENA. What income category?
Thank you. I'm comforted in knowing that I was roughly correct in understanding, in interpreting this Senate bill that I think is out there. I think it's 677 that's under consideration that would change the assessment period, if I've understood it correctly. So since we're sort of on the topic, there's reference to the repercussion of not being deemed compliant as requiring streamlining. I think there are other things that have been referenced in past conversations for communities that are deemed not compliant with SB 35. Could you remind us of some of the implications of being deemed non-compliant, whether it's with 35 or with 423?
So first, if we could just take a little bit of a step back, because I think there's a distinction between progress toward your RENA and housing element compliance.
Yes,
so
please,
there
please
are
put that in
yes.
context. Yeah.
So the risk, if you will, for lack of a better word, for not meeting your progress towards the RENA, the jurisdiction isn't meeting progress toward the RENA in compliance with SB 423, then you are on this list and you're subject to streamlined ministerial approval processes. But it's important to recall that your housing element is designed to provide capacity for the units that you've been allocated for RENA. And if for a jurisdiction, for example, is not implementing its housing element programs, then there's a potential for enforcement activity by HCD. And there's a number of steps that go along with that type of enforcement activity and can eventually lead to a jurisdiction either being subject to litigation by the Attorney General's office, potential housing advocacy groups, and there's the potential for decertification of your housing element. I think, again, it's important to distinguish between progress toward your RENA versus housing element implementation. So progress toward your RENA is addressed through SB 423. Progress or implementing your housing element programs, for example, or for jurisdictions that have not adopted compliant housing elements or whose elements fall out of compliance for one reason or another. That's a different enforcement activity and something we spend a lot of time talking about in the housing element adoption process, including the builder's remedy and what happens if we don't have a certified housing element. So hopefully that provides a little bit of clarification and answers your question.
Thank you. It's good to have a reminder of sort of the distinction between fulfilling your RENA numbers and sort of implementing your housing element. In my mind, I certainly appreciate that they're different, but they're closely related. I think a successfully implemented housing element would, we hope, right, as if it working as designed, allow us to reach our RENA numbers. And if we were not reaching our RENA numbers as designated in these assessment processes, it could be a symptom of potentially a housing element that wasn't being implemented. Is that a correct, or being implemented as required? Is that a logical interpretation?
I would say not necessarily. I mean, I think there are jurisdictions that, strive to meet all their housing element programs and do everything they can to have a housing units developed, and they just aren't developed for whatever reason, whether it's market forces, other conditions in that jurisdiction. As we know, it's very expensive to develop housing in California, and affordable housing comes with its own difficulties in getting financing and everything. So I think that I agree with you that they are obviously connected, right? There's a reason why you have your housing element programs drafted the way they are. First, to provide the capacity to meet the RENA, and then actually encourage the production of housing units. But I don't think it necessarily follows that the lack of the development of the housing units to meet the RENA is necessarily a sign that you aren't implementing your housing element appropriately.
Thank you. I appreciate the nuance and the clarification. Vice Chair Eric.
Thank you, Chair Schindler. I have two comments. The first is more positive in nature, and the second one, I guess, is a little bit more negative. First, I want to say congratulations to, in particular, Menlo Park City staff. I think it is full stop an accomplishment to be at the point that we are, and requires significant work for permitting of all sorts. I also think detailed in this report is a ton of work that has gone into implementing the programs in our housing element, implementing our environmental justice element, and staff deserves a ton of credit for all of that. And I want to make that clear. That's the first comment. My second comment pertains, sort of picking up on where Chair Schindler left off, on a question that will always be in my mind when we review this report, which is, do the zoning changes that we made as part of creating a compliant housing element, are those changes resulting in what we hoped they would result in? And as the city attorney pointed out, it's certainly possible that we could meet our housing goals even if the changes we implemented do not do their job. We can meet them in different ways, and we very well might. But I think it is important to consider whether or not the things that we did to create a compliant housing element are having the effect that they are. I think it's pretty clear, and I'll go through how I see this in a minute, from looking at the data in this report, that as of this writing, it is not the case that basically anything we did, any zoning changes that we have made, have had their intended effect when you look at the amount of permitted housing. So I'm looking at the same table I referenced in my clarifying questions on page A19. There are 62 units permitted in a structure containing 5 or more units. I believe that all of those units were permitted as part of the Oak Gardens project, which broke ground last month. That was one of the first projects that came before the Planning Commission when I joined nearly 2 years ago. So it was 2 years ago, I don't remember it exactly, but I think it's important to consider that the city had basically no discretion in terms of those units. It's not even city land, it's federal land. We weren't required to approve the project. The vote that we took that night was simply to sign a letter of support saying that the city was generally in favor, and we sent that to the federal government. So while I think I'm excited that project is happening, and this, again, city staff deserve credit because there's still permits that had to happen as part of that project. I don't think that is evidence of the city of Menlo Park creating policy that is friendly towards those types of developments. That development would have happened whether we did that or not. In fact, we didn't even have to approve it. So those are those 62 units. Then there are the 57 single-family detached units and the 57 accessory dwelling units. For reasons that were well shown in the clarifying questions, it's sort of hard to know exactly what those units are and are not. But suffice it to say, most, if not all, of the rest of the units we're talking about here are single-family homes with ADUs either attached or somewhat, or maybe detached, but on the same property. Again, it's hard to know exactly which units. I think it's very, it's required that city staff count those units in the report as a certain percentage at the various income levels. That's what the state requires us to do. But I think intuitively, I don't believe that those units are creating affordable housing at those levels, certainly at those ratios based on all of the projects that come to us. So when you look at the data, that's sort of the way that I read it. The changes that we made as part of the housing element pertained to increasing the density available either at base or through bonus density programs downtown and in other areas. That was predominantly what we did as part of the housing element. And there were concerns during that process about whether or not we had created enough of an ability to build density to incentivize developers to build in a very expensive development environment. And as I am looking at the data, it seems from looking at this that we don't have that much. Maybe you can look at the entitled ones and maybe there are a few there, but in terms of the things that we're getting credit for, I don't think it's a fair reading at all to say that the city's policies that were intended to create more housing are actually creating more housing. And I think as we move forward in this RHNA cycle, the city we would all do well to keep that in mind. And again, I don't want to take anything away from staff or from the city, but I don't think we should congratulate ourselves too much on a series of policies that are really not contributing to, in my mind, to our RHNA goals. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
I would love to just appreciate Vice Chair Eric's comments there, I think, and build on that with the following sort of extension. Like, it will take years for the changes that we made as part of the housing element process, specifically the zoning changes, to take effect. I am still only a few years into being part of this commission, but from everything that I've seen and learned about things that happened, well, certainly predated me, it doesn't take 2 years or 4 years or even 6 years to move the needle in significant ways in development. So I think, to me, that means we maintain our sense of urgency as high, like really high, because the things that are delayed 1 year or 2 years or a couple of years to do more, anyways, for any number of reasons, can put things outside of this housing element cycle or potentially even outside of the next housing element cycle. I am so excited about some of the many things that the city has in our pipeline. We've alluded to a lot of the things that we've talked about, but don't show up in this document. And this report and Vice Chair Eric's comments just remind me that it is urgent that every month, every 6-month period, every year really counts in making a difference on these numbers. Commissioner Baruzzi.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that quickly, because I think too that we're all sort of waiting to see what happens with some of the zoning changes. And I almost think of them as a down payment on the next cycle of housing. I mean, we had things like Willow Village and Parkline kind of queued up that weren't necessarily things that were resulting, I mean, those were sort of already happening. And so I think, I mean, just reflecting on how long those things have been discussed, it really is a long horizon. I wanted to, and I will say that that is for me like a big vulnerability that we have, that so many of our potential units are kind of, there are like two or three big developments that we're imagining will come through in a timely manner, and Willow Village being one of them that we've not heard very much about lately. So I think that's something to keep track of. I wanted to talk about the environmental justice element quickly because, while trying to make this a happy zone, it's been hard to read about things like safe housing and anti-displacement and food, and not reflect on some of the things I've been reading in the news about Section 8 funding and CalFresh funding and the kinds of federal funding sources that we've had that contribute to local safety nets, being under threat, I would say. And I'm curious about whether or not, certainly the Menlo Park doesn't have the budget capacity to backfill that kind of stuff, but I'm curious about the degree to which, as we're thinking about the implementation of the environmental justice element, and some of the line items are things like encourage people to, sign up for SNAP benefits. Are we tracking what's happening? Are we collaborating legislatively with some of our local representatives and trying to stay abreast of what changes might be happening? And does staff have any thoughts about that?
Thank you, Commissioner Baruzzi. Certainly, thank you for your question there. It certainly is a very important time of a lot of changes that we're seeing. This may be a good opportunity to share with the Commission that, as you're aware, throughout this environmental justice element preparation process, the Community Development Department has been leading that effort. We are now in a transition period for implementation, and the Sustainability Division, as part of our city's manager's office, will be taking over implementation from here on out. Certainly, community development and all our other departments, divisions, we're still very much part of this. It's an interdepartmental team, but the city manager's office will be leading the implementation of the EJ element. We work very closely with our sustainability manager, and they're very aware of the different changes. They're tracking it, and we're looking at different scoping for funding to implement the different programs and action items, as well as staff capacity. So these are all things that we're thinking about and really doing our best to advance the priorities for EJ.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Sillen.
Thank you. Want to thank the other commissioners for thoughtful comments and questions thus far. Really appreciate that. I wanted to, kind of piggybacking on what Vice Chair Eric said. I'm also a little concerned about our kind of momentum because, from what I can see, if you just look at the number of new units in 2024, it's pretty small compared to what happened the previous year and a half. So there seems to be kind of a slowdown in momentum. And to Vice Chair Eric's point, it's not coming from the changes we made. I also appreciate what Chair Schindler said about it taking time, and I understand that. And so on that note, I want to kind of bring it back to what I was asking the clarifying questions. Like, I guess maybe someone from staff through the chair could just comment on their idea of like our pipeline, because it seems like there are projects that aren't included here, like Sheridan, like Haven, or ones that we might be hearing about soon, like Parkline. I know those were part of the pipeline projects. I believe some of them were, at least in the housing element that was submitted to HCD, but now in this annual report, they've kind of disappeared. So maybe, could staff just comment on their sense of our pipeline going into the next couple of years? Are they concerned about numbers continue to slow down, or should we expect a wave of momentum coming in? And I guess a follow-up question is that possible to include in the report? It sounds like it's not required by the state, but I think just for internal discussion amongst Planning Commission and Council would be very helpful to know.
Sure. There's a brief paragraph about this on page 5 of the staff report that talks about some projects that received entitlements in previous years that have not gotten building permits. So Willow Village was mentioned. That's 1,730 units. Menlo Flats is 158 units. And so those projects are kind of out there in the pipeline that could come to fruition as we continue to work through them with developers. And as it's a obviously a very complex process, and in terms of sort of market, the market and sort of what can be financially achieved in any certain year. But there's that piece of the pipeline out there, and then a number of other projects have been mentioned by different commissioners. So the Parkline project, that could be up to 800 units. We have 888 El Camino Real, which has come in at 41 units, 68 Willow, that is looking at a 50-unit development. And then a few that were more recently approved that will show up on next year's APR would include the 3705 Haven Avenue project with 112 units. And then we're working with the developers for the 123 Independence Drive project that has 432 units. So there are quite a few units still in the pipeline, and hopefully we will be seeing those coming in the next year, 2 years. We should have an increase over what we've seen. I would also say that of note is that we have a program in the housing element for a mid-cycle check-in. And so by 2027, if we are not seeing the types of production, or we're not getting inquiries, interest from developers, discussions about different sites based on the zoning changes that came into place with the housing element, there's always that mid-cycle check-in where council could direct us to look into bumping up the zoning to allow additional units, so that there is a mechanism there to evaluate mid-course if we need to be doing more. But I would say the pipeline definitely has some large projects in the wings that could help us in the next few years.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you can't predict the future, but in terms of specifically the RHNA categories, especially the very low income category, where we're a little bit behind of the projects that you listed, or maybe could you give a general sense of whether you think we're roughly on track versus our mid-cycle review point to have a good amount of units come in those categories, the RHNA categories that the state's looking at?
For a number of those projects, they're going to be subject to the 15% inclusionary zoning. And so you'll see about generally 15% of those units come in as affordable units at either very low or moderate income. A few of those projects, though, do have potentially more than that. Parkline may, and then I think there may be some others in there as well in the mix, but I don't have exact numbers for you in terms of how those units would break down across everything that's in the pipeline. But generally, I think that there is there would be contribution to all of the different income categories that we've listed, but we do know historically that the very low and low income categories can be where we tend to have trouble getting up to that 100% threshold. And so that's why we have other initiatives that we're looking at right now and projects in the works, like the program for looking at city-owned land for development of affordable units that's been progressing through 2024 and is continuing now. So we're trying to find other opportunities as a city to help create the ability to provide those units at the lower income levels as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess my comment here would be that perhaps for the next review, it would be great to have these pipeline projects kind of broken out in terms of what phase they're at, like received entitlements. You know, I assume if they received entitlements, then we should already know the breakdown of the units. If we received an application, but it's still like, let's say Sheridan, even though now we know what's happened, but let's say we hadn't, then, we received the application, waiting for review or something like that, and like, here's the number of units. So that way we could, I think, have a better sense of, heading into the next year, or the next review or whatever it may be, whether there's a bunch of stuff, like you said, waiting in the wings, or whether we're just kind of flying blind. I guess I'm wondering, again, to kind of go off of what Commissioner Eric said, at least based on the numbers, it seems like the rezoning and some of the program changes, like in the R3 district, haven't yet taken effect. But, I believe staff met with developers prior to the housing element and got feedback, and some of that feedback was incorporated into these rezonings. So in terms of like the applications that staff is seeing come in, or discussions with developers about parcels, can you share if you have any sense of whether there is an uptake in, downtown redevelopment or R3 redevelopment, and we're just waiting for things to kind of move through the usual process?
I think we continue to get inquiries about different parcels, especially, for instance, like the 888 El Camino Real project that's in the works right now. They've looked at utilizing some of the zoning changes. We do get inquiries about different parcels around downtown El Camino Real, where developers are looking at utilizing some of those provisions that came into effect. I think it's been said a number of times, but I think it can take a little bit for that to filter through, and to start to see proposals, but we're definitely hearing interest, I would say, in some of those things, like the 68 Willow Road. I think that project is also utilizing some of the new zoning that's in place there. So we're continuing to see that. And the USGS site, that's coming back up for bids. We're getting inquiries about that site as well, housing potential there. So we're definitely hearing and having conversations with a number of different interested parties on parcels throughout the city.
Okay, that is good to hear, and we'll remain optimistic and look forward to more updates on that. I did just have a couple of quick maybe notes or comments about the programs in Table D, starting on page, sorry, I'm way far. Well, I'm looking on page A63. There's a program H2.D, accessory dwelling unit amnesty program, and it mentions that the time frame we committed to was completing that by the end of 2024, and the status is that we haven't yet initiated this program. I believe I saw that for a few others as well, and I heard the city attorney say that we could potentially be in trouble for not following through with the state. But even putting that aside, just, these are commitments that we made to the public. So I'm wondering if staff could comment on whether there's a plan to start some of these programs soon that we committed to, or whether we should expect any sort of update to these timelines.
Yes, there's several programs here that, to walk back in time a little bit, if you'll recall, in January of 2023, the housing element was adopted. And then from there were a number of conversations back and forth with HCD about the housing element. And so we spent a lot of time working on the housing element itself to get certification, which happened in actually a year ago, nearly exactly a year ago. So in March of 2024, we finally received certification and had spent quite a bit of time with HCD on that. So that did set us back a little bit in terms of being able to implement a number of different items. We do know that we need to do a little bit of catch up here. And so that is something that will be a focus as we now have a certified housing element. We can dedicate some more time to that in future years.
Okay, thank you, and looking forward to updates on that. And my last comment, as someone that was, paying attention or trying my best to during the housing element, sort of, like you mentioned, that whole process of getting feedback from HCD and just generally like coming up with what we committed to in the housing element before that. For the programs H4A and H4B, which kind of tie into, those are on page A70 of the staff report. I think those tie into the environmental justice element as well, where one of the top priorities was housing security and working on adding additional BMR units, changing our regulations to incentivize certain types of units, changing zoning, et cetera. What I see as the status here is that we're working with 21 Elements on the regional nexus study, which maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but that kind of sounds like there's a general study going on amongst all the cities in San Mateo County, and we're going to, as part of that, implement whatever comes out of that. My kind of impression of what was discussed when the housing element was being adopted was that, especially combined with the environmental justice element, we were going to be looking at BMR guidelines and different types of incentives specific to the needs of Menlo Park. I don't have, those specifics in front of me, but I'm a little discouraged to hear that, there's this kind of broad nexus study that's still in the RFP phase, and it's going to take a long time to get those results. And then it's not, my worry is that it's not going to be tailored to the needs of Menlo Park residents. So I know that staff is very resource constrained, but I think it would be great to focus a bit more on the needs of Menlo Park residents and see what we can do within kind of our own jurisdiction. And those are all the comments I have on the housing element. I will yield to other commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that Ms. Chow, I just wasn't sure if you had a specific response to Commissioner Sun's comments or any of the other comments that have happened recently.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Sillen, for the comments. I did want to highlight a couple of new things that have just recently been announced. So as part of specifically to the Nexus study that you mentioned, we are partnering with 21 Elements. This proved to be successful perhaps 8 years ago or so, where the city participated also in a nexus study, a joint nexus study with other jurisdictions in San Mateo County. We reviewed ours at the time. Ours did not move forward. Other jurisdictions did move forward with some changes to their inclusionary zoning requirements and or linkage fee requirements. We are again participating with several other jurisdictions. We were recently awarded an MTC grant, TOC policy planning grant for $500,000 for this effort. So we do think that there is momentum to actually move this forward. There will be synergies created with the different jurisdictions in creating this, and there will be also opportunities for customization. So what may work for Redwood City may not necessarily work for us or for other jurisdictions. And so we will have an opportunity, like what are the questions that we are asking for our particular nexus study and commercial linkage fee. So that is coming along, but separately, there's also just work on updates to the BMR guidelines. So that's independent of the nexus study. So there may be tweaks to language around preferences or other mechanisms in our BMR guidelines that we can bring forward ahead of the nexus study. So think of those two as parallel work. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Silverstein.
maybe I should have asked this during clarifying questions, but I remembered that when we did this same review a year ago, we showed that 2023 only had 65 units, and at that time, there were only 99 units that had been approved since the beginning of the cycle. Today, we show that 875 units were approved before 2024, and doing simple math, I realized that the delta there is 776, which is exactly the sum of the Loom and Vasara projects. And my question is, why were those not given credit to 2024, or why were they not originally included in the 2023 updates last year?
Thanks for that question. So you're correct. There was the way that the table is laid out in the form that we get from HCD. It's very sort of prescriptive about where you enter what and how it gets counted. But in conversations with HCD after we had our review here, it was noted that we could count those two projects, Loom and Vasara, towards our projection period, which is sort of like a 6-month period before the start of the 2023 numbers. And so after coordinating with HCD on that, the numbers were added in, and that is where you're seeing, that's actually the bulk, if you will, of the totals that we are seeing at this point in the cycle.
Thank you. So they were just recategorized?
Right.
Okay. Continuing, just to follow up on my clarifying question, one hopeful direction of staff would be to please track housing completed throughout the cycle, not necessarily just in year of what was approved and then completed in 2024, but also of the things that we had approved in 2023 and in theory in perpetuity. How are those projects coming along when it comes to actually completing the housing that we intend to build? The next question that I'd like to ask, and this is either a question for staff or any of the other commissioners here who have a perspective or were more closely involved in this process. And I don't particularly want, I'm concerned about people attempting to speak for others, but I mentioned earlier this evening about the spirit of the law and our guidance as a policy implementing body. And my question is, and a broader theme, is the intent of our housing policy to specifically adhere to the letter of the California and HCD requirements, or is the intent to build more housing units in Menlo Park in an attempt to alleviate what many have called a housing crisis? And the reason why I bring it up is because a lot of the math that we're doing, as Vice Chair Eric mentioned, is specifically in adherence to the HCD requirements, and I don't object to that math whatsoever. I mean, we just follow the letter of the law, but there are a lot of decisions that we are, there are a lot of numbers in there that might paint a good story from the adherence, where we can say that we are on track and we are not in compliance, and we can tell ourselves that we're making progress. But if we are demolishing a single-family residence and building a single-family residence and telling ourselves that we are adding housing to Menlo Park, that is very disingenuous. I recognize that that is something that the state allows us to do, but if the intent of our housing policy is to add more housing, that doesn't cut it. And so if other people have a perspective on whether or not our goal as trying to implement the policies that City Council has set forth, is our goal to adhere to the letter of these numbers, or is our goal to add housing? And I feel the same way about ADUs when it comes to low-income housing or any other math. Like, we can follow the letter of the law and we can say, yes, we added 30 ADUs in single-family residences that cost $6 million. And we can then tell the state that we've added low-income housing, but that doesn't necessarily actually comply with the intent to alleviate housing for people who are actually low-income in Menlo Park. So I'll stop right there if anyone else has a comment on this track, and then I'll come back to one other thing.
Commissioner Baruzzi.
Yeah, I had a comment on that second part, the ADU part specifically. I think one thing that we talked about during the housing element and that I didn't see highlighted here, and I can't remember, I don't think it made it to program status, but I think maybe it was a suggestion, was the idea of a rental registry. And I did a little bit of research because I'm always curious about how the ADUs actually get used in Menlo Park. And we would not, I don't believe, if we were tracking which ADUs are actually being inhabited by renters as opposed to extended family members, which I don't know if you can really track, through some kind of rental registry, I don't believe that would change the way our accounting works for RENA. It doesn't actually. Like the way that the standards that you already outlined, 30-30, 30-10, still apply. But I think it would be useful for us to know anyway, especially for our anti-displacement work, and for sort of understanding where we have naturally occurring affordable housing. I do want to resurface the idea of a rental registry as just something that would give us some real data about how we're actually doing, like what people are paying to rent here and what that looks like. And I agree that, I mean, this is sort of for the purposes of tracking things for the state, this feels important that we're looking at these numbers, but I do like the idea of also looking at real additional housing created as opposed to just replacement housing. And perhaps, I mean, we're not really a policymaking body, so that seems like something that the city council would need to request. But I like the idea of encouraging city council, if it's not too much trouble, to have that be something we track too. It doesn't seem like it would be too hard.
Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks. I would like to kind of add comments to Commissioner Silverstein's line of discussion, and then I haven't yet gotten into all my items, but I'll wait on that. So I think the big answer in my view is both, is that we need to do both, fill out the forms and count the numbers. But I also would disagree with the sentiment that the ADU policies, I think they've moved the needle a lot. When I think about planning, I think of a lot longer term than the family that's first moving in there that first year that it's created, because that home, for example, earlier will exist long after that family is in the same configuration that they are now. It may or may not stay in their family. It may go to two different parties in the future. So we are creating that housing. And so as a planning body, we look beyond the particular residents that are moving in the short term. And so looking at the amount of ADU units, when we first started loosening ADU laws, at least a decade ago, it was incremental. I think we were so excited, and there was like 8. And so I see real progress with that particular policy implementation, even if the first users of that property is a multi-generational household. And I actually do think that qualifies potentially as low income. Maybe not, but so I guess I don't have that level of frustration with what I'm, interpreting as frustration with some of that, as some of my fellow commissioners. And I will pause because I was just about to get into my whole thing, but I will pause there and that's my response to your, yeah.
Can I quickly clarify? I did not mean to imply that multi-generational housing wasn't like something that we should be aspiring to or anything like that. It was more just support of the concept of a rental registry and acknowledging that there are people who might be using housing in a way that we would feel good about, like it's a housing unit being used by somebody that wouldn't make it into the rental registry. Sorry if I'm not being clear on this.
And as another clarification, I did not mean to imply that ADUs add no housing whatsoever, but our current math allows them to add a full unit of housing, which would be equivalent to a 4-bedroom house, which is not the same type of housing addition that would comport to the spirit of allowing significantly more people to live in Menlo Park. The math says a single ADU is a single housing unit. And so if any one of them are used as a guest room for visitors in town, then that is less than what we are, quote unquote, able to account for. So it's not that it's zero, but it's that I don't feel like the housing units that we have on this piece of paper accurately reflects the housing units that we are adding in our community, particularly in the destruction and rebuild of a house, which literally is net zero.
Can I reply to that, Chair?
Commissioner Farrick.
Thank you. Partly, I can see what you're trying to say. I still disagree, though, in that the type of housing that Menlo Park had predominantly before a lot of ADUs came along is single-family housing, a lot of 4-bedroom, 1-bath, whatever, just like that one house on the one piece of property. And so the progress to increase the type of diversity of housing to studios, 1-bedroom units is a move in a good direction in terms of housing diversity. So I kind of disagree with that at a macro level. As a behavior that we feel, I'm not going to base planning decisions on that.
Commissioner Sillen.
Thank you. I wanted to weigh on Commissioner Silverstein's comment as well, which is, so specifically for the ADUs and single-family home rebuilds, I agree that there's some fuzzy stuff in there, but I think bigger picture, especially now hearing that the number for the total new units before 2024 includes some reclassified projects. I'm just kind of worried that, we have about 3,000 new housing units in our arena, and we're about 30% there. But if you look at this year, we only added maybe 10%, less than 10%. So we're not on track. What I heard from staff is that there are a bunch of projects here that may or may not come to fruition, and we're not sure how many units that would get us, maybe 15% of the total, which, doesn't sound like it would get us close to hitting our arena numbers for very low, and not to mention the extremely low income, which we're at 0. With the city parking lots, that does sound like a good opportunity to add a lot of numbers there, but I'm a little bit concerned about the process being slowed down significantly there. So I think we just have to be thinking about what we can do to stay on track, and stay on track in a meaningful way. That's we're actually building units that we feel good about that are going to house people. And I don't think it's just not possible to get there with ADUs, in my view. And so my view, even going into the housing element approval process, was that, yes, we had a lot of programs that on paper met the state requirements, but just a casual observer would not look at what we committed to and say oh, that's for sure going to get us a lot of housing. And I think that's not hard to imagine. It's just sort of a question of how aggressive are we willing to be. And so as we approach the mid-cycle review, I think it's worth considering whether what we've implemented is working and whether we're willing to be more aggressive on changing our standards so that actual housing gets built. As someone that lives in the Allied Arts neighborhood, and I ride my kids on my bike to Oak Knoll every day, I pass at least 5 or almost on every block, there's a new single family home being built. So there's certainly a lot of construction activity going on. It just doesn't seem to be necessarily the kind that would result in a lot of new arena units. So it's clear that the regulations we have in place today do incentivize some type of construction and development. It's just a certain kind. And so I think it's worth considering, are we willing to admit that it's not as much? I mean, I understand that there's market factors and interest rates and all kinds of things, but I also think that just for argument's sake, like if you take one parcel downtown and make it like a skyscraper zoning, I'm sure someone would be interested. Not that I'm saying we should do that, but just as a thought experiment, I do think we can all imagine types of zoning that would bring developers rushing in. And I don't think that's what we have today. Of course, I know this is not the time to start throwing ideas out there, but I think it's something to keep in the back of our minds as we go into the mid-cycle review.
I appreciate Commissioner Sellen's focus on a bias toward action, or at least thinking about what it is that we have in our hands to advance the city's goals and the things that are in our targets. Just by way of, I personally think about this all the time, and so I'm happy to share. Like, there are 2 or 3 micro things, sort of on the small scale, and a couple of macro things that I think about. On a micro scale, I constantly asking myself, on a per project basis, how can we accelerate the timelines of anything related to any kind of housing? On a per project basis, so micro, how can we remove barriers to a project? So that could be anything, including but not limited to funding and any other restrictions. And on a micro level, how can we free up city resources, like humans, funding, all of those kinds of things, on a per project basis to make things go faster? On a macro level, I kind of ask myself the same things. What is it that we can do to remove barriers like zoning? But that's a more macro thing, and it happens on a longer scale. But there's also at a macro level, how can we free up city resources, more funding so that we can actually underwrite affordable housing? And how can we free up staff and other city resources to work on those things? And sometimes I keep that in mind when I think about the reporting that happens here or the work that happens here. Like, what could we be doing that would make things go faster in other areas? So all of those projects that, for example, I think were correctly asked about as not having started in 2024, even though the housing element said them, like, that's a constraint of humans and time and staff resources. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well. So those are a couple of micro and a couple of macro things that I think about when I'm asking myself the same questions that you were asking. Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks. I didn't know if Commissioner Doe hasn't spoken yet, so I was seeing if she was ready, but my comments actually kind of relate with a different frame to what was just brought up, because I actually think being methodical about our planning and all the elements will make projects go faster. Ultimately, I think we're aligned on the goal, but the concern I have with what's some of the activities in the APR report and the lack of coherence with the requirement in the housing element that all projects comply with all of the elements. I actually copied it into my notes just so I could identify it more clearly, but let me start at the start. So program specifically H4.G, prioritize affordable housing on city-owned downtown parking lots. One question I have for, I believe, staff is that given in January 2025, City Council authorized the release of a RFQ for 3 identified parking lots with responses due at the end of this month. I noted that Planning Commission was not a body which met or was part of the outreach or comment period. Obviously, we're all eligible to do that as individual residents. But my question is, will the commission be consulted as the RFQ responses are coming in, and would we be able to provide some input on the proposals that in our view have the greatest potential to be in compliance with multiple general plan elements prior to the council moving forward with one or more proposals, for the reason that when we're the very last to review a project several years in, and we may have very valid comments to make a project actually work better for the future residents, it then feels like we're jammed and not able to make any meaningful change at that point. And so if we could please find mechanisms, maybe this is one, where we could be methodical to go fast and have a better outcome, that would be much appreciated. So I guess it's more of a comment than a question, because I don't anticipate anyone on staff knows the answer to that for sure. But so I will continue to move on, not put anyone on the spot. Circulation element program, Circ-1.A, pedestrian and bicyclist safety, Circ.1.B, safe routes to schools program, et cetera. The question on those elements that are in the APR, in future years, I'm hoping that the APR can include more than a list of isolated activities and show how the city has applied these elements to development projects within the city. In my view, this element could and should be applied to development projects. It feels like we're forced to make really big trade-offs in the name of housing, and not actually address any of the other elements. And that goes directly counter to what is our responsibility as the Planning Commission and the city. So I'd really like to see a better, more integrated APR that shows how we're applying these to the projects that we're counting in these tables. Earlier, we learned that the EJ will now be part of the city manager's remit rather than community development. So that's a bit concerning from the standpoint that that's even another step removed from how we would apply environmental justice element to development projects that come through our work. If the community development department really isn't involved, it sounds like the EJ is becoming a list of disparate projects or activities that aren't related to planning. And so then my question later would become, why are we even acknowledging it as the Planning Commission if it has nothing to do with our work? So those are kind of my concerns, comments, questions wrapped up into one. I'd be happy to take comments from the city staff on this, but I just wanted to voice it because it's of great concern to me that we're actually deciding things running counter to the stated on page 7 of the housing element itself, quote, in accordance with state law, the housing element must be consistent and compatible with other elements or sections of the Menlo Park General Plan. We're not doing that. So we got to figure out how we do that. That's part of the housing element. So there you go. Thanks.
Vice Chair Eric.
Thank you, Chair Schindler. I want to pick up on a few comments and I guess address the point that Commissioner Silverstein made around what is the intent of what we're doing. I think there are lots of intents, but certainly one is to be compliant or to produce a sufficient amount of housing so as not to invite a loss of local control. I just think it's important to, I think it's a point well taken, and several commissioners have made it, that these things take a long time. And so looking at 1 year is not a complete snapshot. Looking at 2024, which is only 1 to 2 years after we pass some new zoning laws, is certainly not enough time for these things to come to fruition. But in the context of a situation where we are always looking to be compliant to prevent loss of housing control, I think it's important to note that basically 100% of the housing that was created or permitted in 2024 was the result of loss of local planning control. ADUs are a state law. The Oak Gardens project is federal land. Without what you could classify as loss of local planning control, we would have produced zero housing effectively this year. And I think as the city goes forward, we would do well to keep that in mind. All that being said, I'm ready to make a motion to approve, but I want to wait just another minute for people to make comments. But I just wanted to say that I'm ready to do that.
Commissioner Doe.
Thank you, Chair. And I was pausing after Commissioner Farrick's comment because it sounded very weighty, and I thought maybe staff might want to weigh in on some of those topics you brought up, Commissioner Farrick. I honestly don't have very much to add, but Commissioner Silverstein's question did raise a question, what are we trying to do here? I cannot speak for staff in the city. I really appreciate the hard work they're doing. And I'm not saying that you're discounting the work they're doing in meeting the numbers, because we just have to, unless we want to meet some repercussions. But I think it's interesting you raise, like, what are we trying to do as a community? And I think that's kind of precisely the problem. You see it played out in public comment, public meetings, walk around downtown. So I think that's kind of, an open-ended question. What are we trying to do here? Depends on who you're calling we. But I just, and I know you weren't trying to do it, but I just do want to recognize, like, the work that staff is doing is not just number crunching. They, like Mr. Smith said, it's really just setting the framework, and it's such a complex process. And Chair, you touched upon it too. It's like setting the framework for a success, and sometimes it feels so like dry and nuts and bolts, and where does the magic happen is that's really the hard part. But I have nothing to add to the really great comments that were made by the other commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Silverstein.
So I guess to follow up on my original question around the intent of our housing policy is because as a planning commission, we are asked to advise and approve projects. And a lot of the focus is on these specific numbers. And I fear that if over 10 years we demolished and rebuilt 2,000 single-family homes, and then we added another 900 ADUs, and we were fully in compliance, I fear that we as a community would take our foot off the gas, so to speak, around actually adding new housing. And I kind of want to understand what this, given that our specific mandate is to implement City Council's directive, I'd like to get a better understanding on what that directive is, and if we are way ahead of compliance for these California required numbers, and I don't want to at all imply that they're not important, because they are very important. But if we're ahead of the curve there, and we as a community still don't feel like we are doing enough to build what I'll just call incremental housing, however anyone wants to define that, is that still something that we should be pushing? Is it still something that we on the Planning Commission should be thinking about? To what extent when it comes to zoning ordinances, should we be moving forward as opposed to just kind of resting on the fact that we're ahead of the curve? And it's not to say we necessarily are right now, and I understand things are complicated there, but that was the broader intention of my question, of just like, to what extent should we be attempting to push things even beyond the minimum? And I know that almost all of our local policies are more restrictive than they could be. And we, as Vice Chair Eric mentioned, like if we had 100% local control, we wouldn't necessarily be building a lot of housing. And so I'm concerned that that is not an active priority to date without the mandate of the state. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before I'm happy to defer to a motion is on the timing of things. And I recognize that we are early into zoning changes and totally appreciate that these things do take years to implement or to come to fruition. But just because we know that the timeline is long doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for signals well ahead of time. If we make a change to our housing element and wait 5 years to see what happens, we very well could be way behind if those changes were insufficient. And so I very much appreciate the first comment that was made by Vice Chair Eric around thinking about the framework of, did we do enough? Do we need to make changes? Are we getting there? And simply by saying, well, these things take time, let's wait and see, could very well be insufficient. And I think that it would behoove us as a community and as a commission to attempt to gather as many early signals as possible, be it submissions or feedback from a developer who chose to take 2 family houses and turn it into 1 because it was financially more feasible. And those signals are very important in indicating whether or not the things that we have done to date are going to eventually lead to where we want to be. And so even though it takes a lot of time to get there, we can still be more proactive than reactive. and we shouldn't just wait and see. Thanks.
Commissioner Peruzzi.
Sorry, I think we're probably winding up here, but I do think, when I look at something like this, and I want to go back to the original source document, and we state it very clearly in the housing element update. The overall focus of the housing element is to enhance community life, character, and vitality through the provision of adequate housing opportunities for people at all income levels. And then there's a list of, specific purposes of this housing element, which includes promoting equity, supporting diversity of population and housing, providing a variety of housing opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that, for the purposes of reporting to the state and sort of checking the box, we're definitely doing that with the counting. And it's not really our province to request more, but I agree that it's good for us to be looking forward and making sure that while we're patting ourselves on the back for not being penalized yet by the state, that we're also asking ourselves, have we laid the groundwork for meeting these goals the way we intended? And, there was very inspiring rhetoric at the beginning of this housing element. I remember reading it and getting chills, just being like, yes, this is why we do this work. And I don't get the same kind of chills when I read that we can definitely count all those single family home remodels and rebuilds. Just not quite the same feeling. And I appreciate staff, and I mean not at all to, I know how hard you all are working, and you're still here listening to us natter, then I want to acknowledge that as well. And you've probably been at work for a long time today already. So this is really more probably directed at council and city manager as, just like, let's keep our eye on that ball too. And that does, I think, require being more proactive than reactive. And probably staff are being pretty proactive. It's just a matter of like making sure that information also somehow filters out.
Yeah. I'll try and tie a couple of comments and threads back to something that the city attorney mentioned earlier in response to a question. So the what are we actually trying to accomplish? The number, the spirit, the policy. For me, the what is the entirety of the housing element. There's a number in the housing element, but there are like dozens and dozens of programs and the how we do things. And so what are we trying to accomplish? I think the answer is all of that. And I think the answer, the point that the city attorney made earlier about the sort of difference between assessing compliance with arena number is a different process, and the state views it as something different than compliance with the housing element, right? And so I think that's telling. I mean, in theory, my interpretation of what she said is it is in theory possible to hit your number, like the hard number, but fail to be successful in the spirit of, or even the letter of all of the programs and policies that are in the housing element. So I almost feel like an annual update like this, there's so much, like dozens and dozens of updates on programs and policies for us to digest. Like, are we on track against the entirety of the housing element? Forget the number. Are we on track against everything else? I think there is an assessment in there that says we've at least started X percentage of the programs. I think that was a positive direction, but that feels like another way of monitoring success. But it's so huge. It's just hard for 7 people who invest, 10 to 20 hours a week, which is nothing to sneeze at. But like the city staff who do this, like, you kind of have to trust also some of these, that everybody is doing the best that they can to execute that housing element. That's how I feel about it. And I reiterate my appreciation for staff for listening to us and for all of the work up until this point. Commissioner Sellen.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying, Chair Schindler, about the micro things that we could be doing to move things faster, and also tying this into what Commissioner Doe was saying about staff's work. I do want to echo what Commissioner Doe was saying. I know staff is in a tough spot. I mean, it feels like every year there's like 20 new state law numbers that I even have trouble keeping track of the numbers themselves, like 423, 35, whatever. So there's all these like state requirements, and then we're here talking about kind of nebulous community requirements that change as different city council members and commission members rotate in and out. So it's definitely a tough challenge to work on this document. I appreciate all the work from staff and all the transparency in the document. I think that to move faster, in my view, one thing that I would, I guess, maybe want to raise up to council is it sounds like we're all saying we feel like there's more that could be done in regards to the housing element, especially given the spirit of it. And in terms of staff's time, Mr. Smith mentioned like all the time spent just communicating back and forth with HCD and looking at the agenda setting exercise the council just did. There's a ton of things on the roadmap that need to be done. And I think that I fully support the potential effort to streamline some things that I would personally see as taking up staff's time unnecessarily, such as having to prepare a report for like a closet expansion on a second story of a house that we heard earlier today. So I would suggest that, I guess my recommendation to City Council would be that we consider that our 2024 numbers seem like we're at risk of falling behind on our RENA. It seems like among at least some commissioners, there's a sense that we could be doing more, especially if we look past, just meeting the letter of the state requirements. So what could we do to free up staff time to focus on those things? Since housing has been identified as a top priority in the environmental justice element for the city as a whole by the state, it's very important. So that's my comment on that. I did have a couple of quick comments on the environmental justice element, but I wanted to first yield to Vice Chair Eric and anyone else that has comments on housing element.
Vice Chair Eric.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion, which we don't have to vote on yet, but, and my motion is going to include sort of a long, hopefully not too long caveat, and it's hard to author this as a group, so I'm going to read it slowly, and we'll try. Okay. I move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council accept the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report, which includes the housing element and environmental justice element. With an important note that while Menlo Park should be proud of our status as one of the few jurisdictions in California to technically produce sufficient housing in 2024, that fact should not decrease the urgency with which we need to keep attacking the challenge of housing production, because the details of our current trajectory are not enough to give us confidence that our city's current approach will ultimately meet the state's RENA requirements, much less the spirit stated in our city's housing element.
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. Question to staff. Is it acceptable to move forward when we're ready for that as a motion with the modifications that Vice Chair Eric has suggested?
Thank you, Chair Schindler. Yes, I do believe we can take that feedback and provide it to the City Council.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to make sure that was clear before we moved forward with it. Commissioner Farrick.
Thanks. This isn't in response to the motion. It's just a couple more points and a reply to Commissioner Silverstein's. My first thought when you were talking about like, how are we going to keep this going as a community is, my first thought was we will have yet another housing element that will get underway within the next few years that will be the 2031 to 38. So it continue, there will be the next and the next and the next. And That said, I think, the way I read the data is, yes, there's a lot of compliance this past year, but also a lot that the signals that I'm reading that it's going in the right direction. My main comments for City Council on the APR is that, yes, I can say, yep, that's the report, those are the numbers, and agree with it, but I really would like the APR to address different things, or maybe there's another mechanism, if not the APR, on how the Planning Commission can have more input on major housing developments than we do on things like the sign for the Citizen M Hotel, of which we had more hearings than major housing developments, or how we as a planning body can have an accelerating effect on getting these more important issues addressed and avoiding some of the unfortunate outcomes that we can be happy. On the one hand, we get a number on a table, but really dissatisfied with a lot of elements of a particular project. We can avoid that if we can be part of the planning stages. Study session doesn't mean we elongate it. It actually means it'll go smoother and faster, because then the staff knows what we can move forward with and what are good trade-offs. So I would like to make those comments to council and to staff. So how we integrate all the elements into the development projects that we are reviewing, how we have earlier input so that the development projects are working in concert with all of the general plan, and how we walk the walk as an integrated whole, rather than pat ourselves on the back for a laundry list of random projects that all in isolation are good, but they don't seem to ladder up to the big meaningful progress that it sounds like everybody wants to see.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Do members of the commission feel like it is, or it would be appropriate to call out the recategorization of those two projects to be into the numbers as something that is worth explicitly mentioning to City Council so they can identify? Without those two, we would have built 275 housing units to date over 2 out of the 8 years, which is less than 10%, when in theory, linearly, we should be at 25. And I don't know to what extent the recategorization is a more accurate representation of our housing progress over the course of the cycle, or if it's more taking something that was actually technically approved beforehand and scooping it into this cycle. And I don't know whether or not that would be something that the City Council should be more aware of, as opposed to just looking at the gross number.
Commissioner Sellen.
Thanks. I want to first say I support what Commissioner Farrick said about also wanting, or I guess being eager to offer more input earlier on in projects. I know we've discussed that with the Sheridan site, and I believe it was the bike parking issue where the developer said, oh, if only we'd known about this earlier. And just generally, I guess, even with Vice Chair Eric's motion and what we're highlighting to council as our view of what's going on, I think we as commissioners would love to be involved in trying to move some of those things along at maybe a program level or whatever is appropriate. And yeah, but to go off of what Commissioner Silverstein said, I guess question for staff is that I know for City Council's meeting, there will be our motion, I'm sure will be in the staff report, and there's typically like a summary from staff as far as what the feedback from Planning Commission was. Is it appropriate for us to request like specific things to be highlighted in that summary that we feel particularly passionate about? Should that be done through the motion? I'm curious how that typically works.
Thank you, Commissioner Sillen. So the staff report, because the meeting for the city council's review is tomorrow, that has already gone out. It went out concurrently last week. We do intend to provide a verbal recap to the council, and we will do our best to summarize and highlight the many different things that have been said this evening. If you'd like to re-emphasize certain things, I'm happy to take the notes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe we could, I don't know if we want to vote on that or something, but I support Commissioner Silverstein's emphasis on the fact that a lot of the units in the numbers came from a reclassification of these two projects. So yes, I would fully support that.
I would also like to emphasize something that Commissioner Sillen said earlier around staff time being a known potential bottleneck for a lot of these projects. I mean, obviously, staff time is super valuable, and that is only more so when we're talking about the bigger developments as opposed to single-family houses, not only from a level of complication, but particularly from an impact to these housing numbers that we're talking about. And one of the things that Commissioner Sillen mentioned was that as part of this process, if we do have fears around eventually hitting our final number over the cycle, one of the potential solutions would be to alleviate some of the current bottlenecks that might prevent us from working harder on the bigger projects, which is some of the potential zoning changes or some of the, for lack of a better term, and don't necessarily say this to City Council, ticky-tacky, nuanced approvals that have to come to the Planning Commission and have to take a lot of staff time because of the ministerial obligations and not necessarily because that is something that we necessarily, or and this would be up to City Council, feel like it is vitally important to enforce.
Can I just ask for a restatement of the motion?
I believe Vice Chair Eric has a written document with the motion that he read and has been seconded, and thus is on the table. Right, but I didn't. Yeah. Could you reread that?
Yes. Am I allowed to revise the motion, or is that not allowed?
You may, and we'll just ask for your second if she's okay with maybe.
Okay. I move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council accept the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report, which includes the housing element and environmental justice element, with an important note that while Menlo Park should be proud of our status as one of the few jurisdictions in California to technically produce sufficient housing in 2024, that fact should not decrease the urgency with which our city must keep attacking the challenge of housing production, because the details of our current trajectory are not enough to give us confidence that the city's approach will ultimately meet the state's RHNA requirements, much less the spirit stated in our city's housing element.
Yeah, okay. I would offer a modification. So my original sort of discussion about being one of the 47 jurisdictions was approved. My understanding was clarified. So that was based on numbers up until and including 2022. So it actually isn't based on 2024 numbers. So the classification that we are compliant and thus not subject to 423 is because it's only based on the end of the fifth cycle. So it was 2022. So I think it's fine. I would just strike that part. Again, the whether we're subject to those restrictions is done on a roughly 4-year assessment, every 4-year assessment. So that's where the attorney clarified something that I had originally misunderstood. So since it was clarified for me, I would like to be sure that it's clear for everybody.
Okay. Thank you. That clarification was helpful. I struck the two words in 2024. So it just reads, should be proud of our status as one of the few jurisdictions in California to technically produce sufficient housing. That fact should not decrease, et cetera.
Thank you. Is Commissioner Bruzzi, are you still comfortable as a second of that motion?
Yeah, I would accept that friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Sorry, is the implication that none of the housing that is included in this report for the 6th cycle is impacting that status?
Correct.
Then I would,
Not until there's a 2027 assessment. That was the clarification that I got from the city attorney.
then I would posit that that fact is not germane to the report and should not necessarily be part of the motion. I agree with your point. I put it in the motion because I think I'm not tuned into all of the discussion around this, but I think the valence around the way this report has been produced in communication I've seen touts that fact. And so I want to note it as part of the motion.
Agreed. I think it helps with the message, which is, to paraphrase, good job, not enough. Commissioner Sellen.
I apologize for just a quick timeout, but I did want to make sure that I get a couple of quick comments in on the environmental justice element before we proceed. And I'll try to make it brief. But I remember at the Bellhaven meeting where we discussed the environmental justice element, I believe that was the final approval meeting. I remember saying to Mr. Chan, like, we have this very long list of programs and commitments, that's all great, but now we need to like make sure they're actually implemented, and I'm very concerned about that. And going into today's meeting, I actually, even though of course there's some programs that are behind schedule, and I generally did have this feeling of like, yeah, we're on track, and I really appreciated the line item responses to each program and the action report and like where it's at, et cetera. I'm a little, I guess, surprised to hear that it's being handed off to a different department, and my understanding is that this department is not present at the meeting today to help us understand what's happening next. So I wanted to, yeah, if it's okay with the chair, I wanted to ask Mr. Chan to briefly just comment on that and what's happening with the handoff
Could
and
you
when.
refine the question?
Yes, my understanding is the sustainability director is taking over the environmental justice action plan. When is that happening, and what does that mean for all these programs that we've committed to?
Sure, I'm happy to begin providing some thoughts, and perhaps Community Development Director Deanna Chow has some additional thoughts being part of the management team. So I'd like to assure the Commission that the Community Development Department is not relegating our responsibilities here. We work together under this whole city umbrella, and we will continue to be a very important interdepartmental role to implementing EJ. It's just that who is taking the helm to group people together to move things along, it will be the sustainability division. There are still a variety of different things that the Community Development Department is lead role in, as such as like the Public Works is also lead role in. So as you look at the action guide, you'll see all the different lead roles identified. Everyone still has their lead role. It's just who is the quarterback per se. It's shifting a bit, but we're all still on the same team here.
Thank you. Can you clarify when that shift is happening, or if it already has?
So I believe that shift, it's already begun. And I don't see this as like a stepping back, but actually just a propulsion forward. We adopted our EJ element in September, and as you've seen in your action guide, a lot of the things we're making great progress on. I would say the majority of things are already in progress. There's lots of momentum under there. If you were able to see the City Council's priority setting meeting, myself, as well as the sustainability manager, Rachel Launder, we sat next to each other, providing an update of the accomplishments as well as where we're headed. Rachel is very excited to work on this, and I'm also very happy to be by her side.
Thank you. Yeah, so just one quick comment, and then we can get back to the motion. Again, I personally felt that the environmental justice element was an outcome of a lot of going out to the community, and that was, I believe, the spirit of the whole thing and why it was required by the state as a new element in the general plan was to sort of address previous wrongs caused by a lot of different historical things like redlining and racism and et cetera. And we came up with this list and said, like, these are the things that we think will address the community's concerns. The community provided input on their top three, housing, food, and I think air quality. And I just think it's very important that we keep chipping away with that. It's great to hear that, you feel good about momentum, and I agree that there's a lot of programs being moved forward. I did just want to call out a couple of things. So with EJ5.G, which is the program to focus on anti-displacement, I remember specifically one of the big community comments on that was that there's been a lot of outreach to date from the city on that topic, and a lot of surveys and information gathered, and the community really wanted to see more action. So I'm a little disappointed to see that the activity there is an additional survey, but I am optimistic that there's a proposed study session with council in 2025 that will hopefully result in some action being taken. And then just in general, my observation was that access to food was community goal priority number 2, as it says in the report, but a lot of the programs have not been started, specifically ones that relate to food. There's stuff about community gardens and things like that, but I'd really just like to encourage staff to move those forward. Not looking for a response from staff, just want to provide those comments on the record. And I yield back to Commissioner Stovacine, who had something to say about the motion. I am generally happy to support the motion the way it is now. Thank you.
So I 100% appreciate the attempt to shine a positive light on all the progress we have made. And I believe we should absolutely do that by emphasizing the fact that we are ahead of schedule by having completed 35.7% of our required housing units, even though we are only 26% of the way through the cycle. And we should tout that progress as being amazing. I still maintain that the fact that we didn't get in trouble from something that happened before 2022 is not relevant to this cycle. And I mean, we can say it, but it's not, I don't know. I don't think there's a reason for that to be a function of this report or the motion accordingly. But if we're looking for positive news, there's absolutely positive news in the numbers that we have hit so far of the 1051 housing units we have officially added to Menlo Park's 6th cycle.
I'm happy to, I guess what I would say is I put it in the motion, honestly, not because I was looking for good news. I just wanted to make sure, or what my hope was that if it's discussed at City Council tomorrow and we have a motion that does not include that acknowledgement, someone will say Menlo Park is one of the few jurisdictions to be producing sufficient housing. There's no reason for us to be concerned.
But that wasn't a 6th cycle thing at all. There was no.
Right, sorry.
But, I mean, I think one of the messages we've discussed repeatedly here, though, is that everything is interconnected, right? That this is a number that reflects this housing cycle, which we are only roughly 2 years into. But it's been said repeatedly that the numbers in there originated in the 5th cycle. So, and so on and so forth. So success 5 years ago or successful action 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, right, probably is driving some of the things that happened in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. So I'm very comfortable counting a win in cycle 5 in the context of a discussion of cycle 6. I feel like we might be over the line in terms of thinking about just how important these particular words might be tomorrow to council.
I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge that.
I am ready to call a vote if folks are ready to vote on the resolution as it is written. We have a first and a second. I do not see hands raised for further discussion. So I will go ahead and call a vote on the resolution as with modifications proposed by Commissioner Eric. Thank you. Commissioner Peruzzi.
Yes.
Commissioner Doe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric.
Yes.
Commissioner Farrick.
Yes.
Commissioner Sillen.
Yes.
Commissioner Silverstein.
Yes.
And I am also a yes. The resolution with the proposed additional language from Vice Chair Eric, thank you very much, is approved. And that brings us to a close in our general business component of the agenda and brings us to our final component, which is informational items. Ms. Sandmeyer, would anybody from staff like to provide an update on upcoming Planning Commission meetings and agendas?
Yes, good evening again. So the next meeting's April 14th, so 3 weeks from today. The agenda hasn't been finalized. It's looking like it may be 2 single-family home projects, but that'll be verified once we send out the notice on Thursday or Friday. And then April 28th, we're still looking at potential items for that meeting. And that concludes the informational items, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do commissioners have any questions about that update? Okay, I see no questions, and therefore I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 10:42 p.m. Thank you, everyone.